professional job for our country. We are, in a sense, seeing the definition of a new battlefield in the world, a 21st century battlefield, and it is a different kind of conflict. It is something that is not unique to this century, to be sure, but it is, given our geography and given our circumstance, it is in a major sense new for this country. Finally, I'd like to say a word or two to the men and women in the defense establishment, most of whom deal with classified information. Since the end of the Cold War, there's been a relaxation of tension, and it's had a lot of effects. It's led to proliferation. It's led to the movement towards asymmetrical threats as opposed to more conventional threats. One of the other effects has been it has had an effect on how people handle classified information. And it seems to me that it's important to underline that when people deal with intelligence information and make it available to people who are not cleared for that classified information, the effect is to reduce the chances that the United States government has to track down and deal with the people who have perpetrated the attacks on the United States and killed so many Americans. Second, when classified information dealing with operations is provided to people who are not cleared for that classified information, the inevitable effect is that the lives of men and women in uniform are put at risk, because they are the ones who will be carrying out those prospective operations. And this is a message really for all the men and women in the United States government who have access to classified information. It seems to me that when they see or learn of someone who is handling classified information in a way that is going to put the lives of the men and women in uniform at risk, they ought to register exactly what kind of a person that is. It's a person who's willing to violate federal criminal statutes and willing to frustrate our efforts to track down and deal with terrorists, and willing to reveal information that could cause the lives of men and women in uniform. I think it's time for all who deal with that information to treat it with the care and respect that it merits. I'd be happy to respond to a few questions.
Secretary?
Yes, Tom.
The casualty figure you referred to, I assume, is the 800 number that was provided by the Arlington County Fire Department.
It is.
And you say it's considerably high. We've heard from the military service.
I hope and pray that it is.
The military services, information from the military services indicates that it may be more in the neighborhood of 100 to 150. Is that closer to reality, or can you give us some
We just
better
won't
guidance?
know until we finish the work. The problem with trying to do roster checks with units, it may not include people that were connected with the heliport, it may not include people, contractor people, it may not include watchmen, it may not include work people who were working in the area. So it is folly to try to pretend that there's a number before there's a number. There is not a number, nor have we pinned down precisely how many people were in the aircraft who would also be in that general area.
There are some in the Middle East who are saying that the United States does not have the belly to do the kind of response to this attack on the United States that this administration, previous administration, don't have it to go after them in the kind of way that they have to be gone after, without any specifics whatsoever. Help us with the attitude that you go into this process with.
Well, I guess time will tell. I guess I'm kind of old-fashioned. I'm inclined to think that if you're going to cock it, you throw it, and you don't talk about it a lot. So my instinct is that what you do is you go about your business and do what you think you have to do. I think anyone who thinks it's easy is wrong. I think that it will require a sustained and broadly based effort, and I don't think that people ought to judge outcomes until a sufficient time has passed to address what is clearly a very serious problem for the world. And it's not restricted to a single entity, state or non-state entity. It is an attack on a way of life. The purpose of terrorism is to terrorize. It is to alter behavior. It is to force people who believe in freedom to be less free by altering their behavior and redressing a balance between freedom and security. Anyone who's ever been in a war zone, as I know most of you have, you know that when you walk out of a building, you don't walk out with your head high whistling. You look around the corner and see what's out there. And that's not the way Americans live, and that's not the way we want to live.
Secretary, Mr. Secretary, may we ask one? I was just cut off for a second, which I kindly left to my colleagues. So we're getting word from reporters at the White House, quoting Ari Fleischer, that the target of the 757 was actually the White House, and also Air Force One was targeted. Can you shed any
I'll leave that to the White
House.
House. I'll leave that to the White House.
Mr. Secretary, your comments on the handling of classified information, are you suggesting that it's time to move to a more secretive government in which there's less transparency about what it is you're doing, and how does that square with the goal of openness that reassures both friends and foes around the world that the United States intentions are good? We all know that there's a wealth of material that's classified unnecessarily and doesn't necessarily need to be.
Well, as I'm sure you've discovered, I do believe in openness, and I think it's enormously important in a free system with a free press and a democratic underpinning to our wonderful success as a country that we recognize that and respect it. I also know that you're quite right. There are things that get classified that ought not to be classified. But what I said is enormously important, and that is that when classified information is compromised by people who ought to know better because they're unprofessional or uncaring and perfectly willing to violate federal criminal law and seemingly willing to put people's lives at risk, their colleagues and their neighbors and their friends, I think it's something that should stop. Yes.
Secretary, was this...
Jim's question, folks, he needs to leave. We need to get you across the river for the last question.
Was sloppy handling of classified information, did that play some role in the attacks?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay, sir.
It is an issue that I think, however, needs to be elevated and looked at, and that people in all aspects of government.
What's the catalyst? Why are you raising that today?
Yeah, has it happened in the aftermath?
It has been happening daily.
Sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld, one of the true veterans of this administration, former Illinois congressman, former director of the OMB, former Secretary of Defense, former White House Chief of Staff, widely considered to be one of the most skilled political operators in Washington with a wide-ranging portfolio and a conservative warrior who is determined to bring a new kind of discipline and realignment to United States military forces, sending a very strong message to the U.S. military services today that he will not tolerate any sloppy handling of classified material. It seems to me that he was sending a very strong warning in advance of what will be at some point a military operation against the people who were responsible for this terrorist war that was declared on America yesterday and carried out in New York and in Washington, D.C. And there are criminal penalties for mishandling classified information. They're not always invoked, obviously, but the Secretary was saying to military personnel, do not in any fashion jeopardize the lives of people who may be involved in these operations by carelessly handling classified information or trying to make yourself out to be a big deal by sharing it with other people, including, by the way, the press. So that is Don Rumsfeld, who gave us an update from the Pentagon. Now he goes off to the White House for a meeting. He would not comment on reports from the White House that, in fact, the White House itself and Air Force One were targets of the hijackers based on what R.A. Fleischer is describing as credible evidence. He also said that the estimate of the death toll at the Pentagon given to us by the Arlington County Fire Department of 800 was far too high. We had been reporting earlier today that they have revised that estimate down to just over 100, but he wouldn't get into a number because he said we won't know until we're able to go in there and get a complete accounting of the roster of the people who were there and the people who were supposed to be there. Don Rumsfeld is one of the principal patrons of the President's Missile Defense Shield. That will go forward as a critical part of the national security agenda of this administration. And the people who are supporting it and promoting it were quick to say yesterday, of course it would not have had an effect on this kind of a terrorist war. It was not designed to do that. We were talking about other uses for the Missile Defense Shield, which is to intercept incoming missiles, especially those that may be launched from so-called rogue nations. Dan Abrams, you're in Lower Manhattan. Can you tell us if there's anything new? Certainly, is there any encouraging news to come out of the search and rescue operations?
Well, Tom, the rescue effort continues, and every once in a while there's a good piece of news, and that is either that they have found an additional person, they have found an additional firefighter, but it has been few and far between. I think a lot of the triage units here are a little disappointed. Only disappointed that there are not more people that they can help. There aren't more survivors there. They are set up there. The hospitals here are prepared. And I think one of the most disappointing aspects of this for the hospitals is that there aren't more survivors. With that said, they are still working furiously behind me. I can tell you that I've been talking to firefighters, I've been talking to EMTs, I've been talking to doctors who've been emerging from that scene, who have just been talking about the heroic efforts, in particular by the fire department there, to literally dig through feet and feet of rubble. And that is exactly what they're doing. And Tom, I can also tell you from walking the streets here, remember, all of Manhattan is closed below 14th Street. And from those who are not from Manhattan, that is an enormous portion of Manhattan Island. And from walking around what are fairly empty streets, as a lifelong New Yorker, I can tell you I've never seen anything like this. People who don't know one another saying hello to one another. People who don't know one another sitting down at cafes with one another talking about what has happened. There's this image of New Yorkers as this sort of jaded group. This, I think, has changed everything. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Dan Abrams. Within 30 seconds or so, the Attorney General of the United States will be briefing. We've heard from Secretary of State Colin Powell talking about an alliance of nations. Here is now the Attorney General, also Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld, talking to reporters today.
Highly coordinated effort. I want to thank all of the federal, state, the local agencies that have worked tirelessly yesterday and today to help the victims of this act of war find relief and to help the United States of America locate the people who are responsible for these terrible acts of war. Immediately after the first report of a plane crashing into the World Trade Towers, numerous federal agencies coordinating with the White House mobilized their resources. Throughout the day, secure video conferences took place among the National Security Council, the Department of Justice, the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the Department of Treasury, FEMA, CIA, the FAA, and other federal agencies. Both the President and the Vice President presided over a number of cabinet and sub-cabinet meetings and video conferences. Continuity of government plans were put into effect. Within the Department of Justice, our full resources were put into operation immediately. As I will explain in greater detail in a few moments, these resources have been deployed both to investigate this act of war and to assist victim survivors and victim families. But let me stress that this is not simply a Department of Justice effort. The response of the federal government across the board has been, I believe, from the President of the United States to the rescue workers, magnificent. I'll now turn to the information that the response we have been making has developed. I'll give you the information that we can give you. However, we will give you only facts that we can confirm. You may be hearing things that we have not told you, but some people have the luxury of speculating. We won't speculate, but we'll only give you confirmed facts. And also, we must be careful to protect confidential intelligence sources and the methods of our intelligence so we do not compromise this ongoing investigation or the capacity of this nation to undertake such investigations as this. The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane, using knives and box cutters, and in some cases making bomb threats. Our government has credible evidence that the White House and Air Force One were targets. A number of the suspected hijackers were trained as pilots in the United States. The Department of Justice has undertaken perhaps the most massive and intensive investigation ever conducted in America. The full resources of the FBI, the Justice Department's Criminal Division, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the INS, and other components have been brought to bear and will be focused in this endeavor. Throughout the day and into the night last night, Deputy Attorney General Larry Thompson and Assistant Attorney General Michael Chertoff, who is not with us at this moment, and I were present at the FBI's Strategic Information and Operations Center, together, of course, with the director and a number of other individuals. The Justice Department is working closely with investigators, the FAA, and the intelligence community, including the CIA, the NSA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Defense Department. Numerous agencies have assigned personnel to the SIOC at the FBI to coordinate investigative efforts so that information which is received on these premises becomes immediately available to the cooperating agencies. And I might add that we reciprocate with similar deployments in a variety of other settings. The Justice Department's Terrorism and Violent Crime Section is coordinating the response of the U.S. Attorney's offices nationwide. These agencies have a presence at the SIOC here in the FBI 24 hours a day and are coordinating efforts both in the United States and worldwide around the clock. Investigators are reviewing intelligence and have received numerous credible leads. Command posts have been established at all crime scenes. Evidence response teams and the FBI's disaster squad have been deployed to the crash sites. The recovery of bodies and the collection of evidence is ongoing at the Pentagon and at the crash site in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. Investigators are working with the National Transportation Safety Board to recover the black boxes from the crash sites. The crime scene at the WTC has been secured, but is not yet a crime scene accessible to investigators. The United States Attorney's Office's terrorism units and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces are obtaining the passenger manifests, rental car receipts, telephone logs, videotape from parking garages, and pay telephone videotape records at all scenes for review and appropriate follow-up interviews. All investigative resources of the FBI's laboratory and crisis response capabilities have been mobilized. Now let me turn this podium over to FBI Director Bob Mueller to talk more about the investigation itself.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. I want to start by saying that the men and women of the FBI join the nation in expressing our deep sympathies for the victims of these horrific tragedies and their families. And we, all of us in the FBI, pledge to those directly affected by these attacks that we will leave no stone unturned in our quest to help find those responsible and to bring those individuals to justice. Let me turn, if I could, for a moment to the effort that we have undertaken at the FBI to investigate these tragedies. Early after the planes started to fall yesterday, as soon as we heard that there was a particular city that was either a city of origin for a flight or a city such as New York where a flight went in, we established command posts. We have at those command posts and at a number of offices around the country where there are leads, more than 4,000 special agents who are assigned to assist this investigation. 4,000 special agents and 3,000 support personnel. We have over 400 of our laboratory personnel deployed at the crime scenes in New York City, south of Johnstown in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon. And we anticipate this level of resource commitment will continue for the immediate future. In the last 24 hours, we have been addressing two objectives. The first objective is to determine, identify the hijackers on each of the planes. Having identified the hijackers on each of the planes, we then have sought to identify any of their associates remaining in the United States. Our first effort is to identify any associates in the United States who might be related to the hijackers and to remove those associates, investigate, and arrest, given the evidence, those individuals, and to remove any threat to the air system in the future. That is our first objective. The second objective is to gather any and all evidence we have as to whom assisted the hijackers, and not only in this country, but also overseas. We have, in the last 24 hours, taken the manifests and used those as an evidentiary base, and have talked to many of the families of the victims, and have successfully, I believe, identified many of the hijackers on each of the 4 flights that went down. We also have identified through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively. Let me conclude at this juncture by emphasizing again the FBI's total and unwavering commitment to this investigation. We will not stop, and as I said before, we will leave no stone unturned until we have determined who was responsible for these attacks on our freedom. Now, I would be happy to entertain questions, as I'm sure the Attorney General would.
Director, has there been any arrests of any of these associates that you've identified the communities of?
Now, I understand that there is reporting out there that the FBI has made arrests with regard to the hijacking. That is not accurate. There have been occasions where we have interviewed individuals and come to find that the individual is out of status and that individual has been detained on an immigration hold. But there have been no arrests relating to these hijackings at this point.
Talked to and the people that you've identified, are these people that have been under FBI's watch in the past relating to other kinds of terrorism activities? Are they people who you're familiar with?
As we identify names, there may be one or more individuals with whom we have information as to involvement with individual terrorist groups.
We've seen activity today in Boston, Rhode Island, and southern Florida. Can you walk us through, in any of these cases, and give us any guidance on why these particular individuals have been stopped and what the FBI is doing?
We have in Boston, my understanding also in Providence, and also in Miami, we have leads indicating the presence at some point in time of either the hijackers themselves, and we are attempting to recreate the travels of each of the hijackers on the planes, either the hijackers themselves or their associates. And consequently, we are following all leads with interviews, with search warrants, and whatever investigative techniques are necessary to obtain the evidence.
They've got to get to the White House for a meeting.
How many?
How many associates, Mr. Mueller, do you think? And how many more workers at the airport?
I can't give you a definitive number on the associates. Thank you very much.
Well, there's an important piece of news in that briefing from Robert Mueller, who is the new director of the FBI. The FBI has made no arrests in this case so far. There have been any number of reports today of 3 being arrested in the Boston area. NBC's Pete Williams was telling us earlier that it was his understanding that they'd asked for warrants for the arrest of material witnesses in the case. That is, that they want to question some people in that. But Robert Mueller saying that there had been no arrests thus far. 3 to 6 hijackers on each plane, armed with knives and box cutters, but also using the threat of bombs on board. Obviously, several of them had been trained as pilots in the United States. That, according to Attorney General John Ashcroft. They also repeated what we've been hearing from the White House. The White House saying that both the White House and Air Force One were targets of these hijackers. They had credible evidence to that effect. R.A. Fleischer was the source of that. He is the White House press secretary, and he's scheduled to give a briefing before too long. There will be a meeting going on at the White House that Secretary Rumsfeld and others will be attending before too long. I have on the telephone now from Kansas City a man who was on one of those diverted flights, the former director of the CIA, Robert Gates. Mr. Gates, let's just catch up, first of all, with your personal travel. Where were you headed when all of this happened?
I was on my way to Cleveland.
From where?
From Seattle.
Uh-huh. And where did they divert you to?
To Kansas City here.
You had to stay overnight?
At least one.
Uh-huh. And are they going to let you go on to Cleveland now?
I think I'll try and head back home.
Back to Seattle?
Yeah.
Mr. Gates, you ran the CIA during a difficult time in America. What would be your recommendation to the president in terms of what he must do, first of all, as he sets out diplomatically and militarily to carry on his end of what he has now called a terrorist war in the world?
Seems to me that the actions that the government has underway are in fact the exact way to go. Finding out what the facts are, pursuing the evidence, assembling the evidence in terms of who is responsible, at the same time as taking action to deal with the aftermath of the tragedies here at home. Dealing with foreign leaders, making clear that that this is the time for, in essence, the rest of the world to fish or cut bait in terms of their relationship with the United States. There are those who support and sympathize with the terrorists, and there's everybody else. And there's not any room left for nations or groups operating in gray areas.
William Arkin, who is as you know, probably a national security affairs and terrorism expert, was saying earlier, we probably did get some intercepts. We just couldn't sift through them in time to head it off. Is that a problem in our intelligence community these days?
Well, I don't know what the what information might have been available. I've heard on the various television programs people talking about the emphasis on in recent years on electronic intelligence as opposed to human intelligence. But the truth is that that both have been fairly starved for resources for quite some time. And if you talk to knowledgeable people, they will tell you that the electronic side faces as many challenges and the need for resources as human intelligence. There have been efforts during the 90s to improve human intelligence, but these are incredibly difficult targets to penetrate. They're family and clan-based. Most of them are related. They almost all have bloody hands already. And as you're aware, in recent years, there's been a lot of controversy over the kind of people that CIA might use as sources, and I think that has imposed perhaps some obstacles to getting as many sources as we could. But I think that the problem is that all of these resources need to be increased, not just one or another kind of collection discipline.
What you're saying is that if we're going to be dealing with people who have bloody hands, we may have to enlist our own people who have bloody hands.
Well, what I'm saying is that if you're going to recruit an agent who can tell you what a terrorist group is planning, chances are that person is going to be a member of that terrorist group and not have clean hands. And the question is whether you're prepared to make the trade-off of dealing with people like that in exchange for information that might prevent catastrophes like this.
That's just one of the many difficult decisions that this country is going to have to make, Mr. Gates. We hope that you do get either back home to Seattle or your destination, because we want to go to Pakistan now, where we have a correspondent, Ron Allen, in place. Pakistan is turning out to be a key player. We're going to go, Ari Fleischer is coming up in the White House in the press briefing room. Ari Fleischer is the source of those reports that the White House itself and Air Force One were targets of these hijackers, that they have credible evidence to that effect. We'll be eager to hear his answer to the many questions that he'll have when he goes into the White House press briefing room, although he is likely to say that for reasons of security, we can't share with you all of our intelligence information that we have, and that very often is the case. We heard earlier from Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld a very sharp warning to military personnel that they ought not to be careless in their handling of classified material and sharing it with other people, because they put their colleagues, the men and women who are in uniform, at risk. And it seemed to me that he was sending that as a preemptive strike as they prepare some kind of a military operation against these terrorists. He does not want to be reading about it first or hearing it on television or radio while the operation is underway. That is always a dilemma, because very often the Pentagon and other national security agencies are leaky during these times of military operations, and we do hear about it. But our standing procedure here at NBC is that if there are troops at risk, we do not go on the air with that material. We knew, for example, during the bombing run against Libya, when the planes lifted off in England, and where they were and where they were headed, and did not say anything until they began to drop their bombs. I remember being in Haiti when units of the 82nd Airborne lifted off from Fort Bragg. In fact, we think that the Haitian government probably got a tip from a pay telephone just outside of Fort Bragg, because those big cargo planes were lifting off into the nighttime skies. Everybody was aware of it. And, of course, the negotiations were underway between Jimmy Carter and the Haitian government. Here's Ari Fleischer now at the White House.
The President today has been making a series of phone calls to leaders around the world to rally an international coalition to combat terrorism. He has spoken today with Prime Minister Blair, with Prime Minister Chrétien, with President Chirac, with Chancellor Schroeder, with President Jiang of China, and twice with President Putin. The President will continue to reach out to leaders throughout the world to develop this coalition to send a message that the United States and the world stand united, all the freedom-loving countries and others, to fight terrorism. The President is also gratified by the action taken today by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, in which they invoked Article 5, saying that an attack on one NATO nation is an attack on all NATO nations. The President is also gratified by the United Nations Security Council resolution that passed today condemning this attack and saying that it was a threat to international peace and security. Finally, as the President said in his remarks this morning, freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know that we are facing a different enemy than we have ever faced, with the President's words. In this case, we have specific and credible information that the White House and Air Force One were also intended targets of these attacks. As the President also said in his remarks, this battle will take time and resolve, and make no mistake, we will prevail. I'm happy to take questions.
In terms of this specific threat that you talk about against the White House and Air Force One, we have heard from administration officials that the plane that went into the Pentagon may have originally been targeted at the White House. What can you tell us about that?
John, we have real and credible information that the airplane that landed at the Pentagon was originally intended to hit the White House.
Can you tell us about the nature of that evidence?
No, of course I cannot. Any questions relating to how we have obtained any of this information, sources and methods, I will of course not answer.
Why it changed course, why it went to the Pentagon and not the White House?
We really do not know the answer to that, but we are aware of what we have.
Why did Vice President Cheney remain in the building?
The Vice President was removed to a secure area at the White House.
We were told he was working out of the Situation Room with Condolences Rice.
The Vice President worked out of several locations, and the White House has sufficient secure locations in events such as this. And this follows a regular plan that the White House has in case of any such incidents. Campbell?
Reports that the plane flew over the Pentagon and passed over the U.S. Capitol. If the White House was indeed a target, there have been military sources who say...
No, I've not heard that report. I've not heard that report.
All right, the threat against Air Force One.
Kelly?
All right, then do you have credible information that the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania was intended for Air Force One?
Do not have any information about that, about that plane.
If Air Force One happened to be a target, isn't it true that when the President went to Louisiana, at that point, once he took off from Louisiana, there were no flights in U.S. airspace?
No, at that moment, there were still reports of airplanes that had not yet been identified as to the whereabouts. That's another reason that the White House and the President operated in the secure manner that they did. At that moment, when the President had left Florida and was on his way to a base that no one knew where the President was heading to, there were still reports of planes that had not yet been brought onto the ground per the FAA's order.
So, I follow up though, but when Air Force One left Louisiana and headed to Nebraska, I believe at that time there were no U.S. planes or any planes still in U.S. airspace. So then why did the President go to Nebraska and not back here to the White House?
Because the information that we had was real and credible about Air Force One, and the manner in which Air Force One operated maintained the security of Air Force One at all times, and that also was one of the reasons why Air Force One did not come back to Andrews, where some people may have thought it would.
If we could make the connection here, that would suggest, Ari, that the threat against Air Force One came in the form of another aircraft?
No, I'm not indicating what form it came in, John. And I will not.
Time did the White House get this information?
On the flight from Sarasota to the first location.
So did the evacuation of the White House come as a result of that information?
That's a detail that I'm not going to get into, Terry, but all appropriate security precautions were taken.
And then on the subject of rallying this international coalition, does that indicate that the President would wait or try to get the support, either operational support or political support of other nations before responding to these attacks?
Well, I'm not going to indicate anything about, speculate about any type of response. You've heard what the President said, and his words speak for themselves about America's resolve. However, as I indicated in my opening statement, the President is very heartened as a result of the world reaction and the solidarity that the world is showing at all levels in so many nations toward what has happened. And the President is going to continue to talk to leaders around the world as he builds his coalition.
Did the President secure the support of President Zhang and President Putin in those phone calls?
Let me try to give you a little more specific information on each of those phone calls. President, as I indicated, spoke twice with President Putin, once for 5 minutes, the second time for 7 minutes. The President thanked President Putin for his call and for the message of condolence that President Putin sent yesterday. President Putin informed President Bush that he had signed a decree that there be a moment of silence at Russia and throughout Russia at noon tomorrow, with flags at half-mast to express the outrage and solidarity of the Russian people with the American people. The two presidents agreed that they would work closely together in the coming weeks to fight those responsible for yesterday's acts of terrorism. The President's phone call with President Jiang of China lasted for approximately 10 minutes. President Bush thanked President Jiang for his condolences and concern for the American people as well, and the two agreed to work together also to combat terrorism, which is another indication, as I mentioned, of the coalition the President is seeking to form as the world unites in the fight against terrorism.
All right, will that coalition look at all like the Persian Gulf Coalition? Is he reaching out to Arab nations as well?
The President's going to continue to have conversations throughout the world, and as you know, Secretary Powell has too, talked to many people, and we'll try to keep you informed of the conversations the President has.
But is it right that the President has not yet reached out to any Arab nation leaders?
I'm going to try to do my best to keep you informed, but this is a process, and the President is going to continue to make phone calls. The President is, as you know, he has a meeting this afternoon with the security team. Following his meeting with the congressional leaders late this morning, the President had lunch with the Vice President. He made additional phone calls. He has a meeting with the security team today, and we're going to keep you informed of all the information we can about the President's phone calls and activities.
Given the scale...
Ari Fleischer at the White House repeating the claims that he made earlier that the White House has credible evidence that both Air Force One and the White House were targets of these hijackers yesterday. The indications were that the plane that crashed into the Pentagon was originally destined for the White House. He would not share with anyone there the sources of his information, saying that that would compromise national security and classified information. As for Air Force One, nor would he share with any of the reporters there how Air Force One could have been a target yesterday as it left Florida, went to Louisiana, and then on to Omaha, Nebraska, except to say that there were still planes in the air, and no one was entirely clear what was going on some of those domestic flights before they landed. He also described the President's efforts to build an international coalition, very much as the President's father did when he went to war in the Persian Gulf. Mrs. Bush made a public appearance today, and she too had something to say about this terrorist war that the United States now is fully engaged in.
Behind me are some of the members of that emergency response team. So besides having the chance to visit with 3 of the victims who are here at Walter Reed, whose lives will be changed forever, like all of ours, and by the way, who are all in very great shape and look like they'll recover fully. Besides the chance to thank them for their service to our country, to give them our wishes for a very speedy recovery, I also had the chance to thank the emergency team members, some of whom are behind me. Some of these emergency team members were just in their last few days of a nursing course here, a practical nurses course. They never expected to have to deal with a situation like this at the very end of their course, and I know how tough it is for them, just like it is for the patients who are in here as well. So I'm really thankful that I have the opportunity to thank them and to wish my best to the patients. All of us now as Americans have the opportunity to show our compassion, our resilience as a country, our courage. That's what these members of the team behind me showed America yesterday when they rushed to the Pentagon to rescue people. It also gives us all a chance as Americans to do what we can for our fellow Americans, to donate blood in cities where they need more of an adequate supply. Certainly, if people want to wait a month or two and replenish the blood supply in their own communities, for some of the blood may be sent to New York or here, but it's a really good thing to do. It's also just a way to think of how we can help each other, and a way to think about how we can reassure our young children that they're safe. It's a time for parents to make sure their young children don't spend a lot of time in front of the television to try to protect their young children and keep them from being fearful. This is just a good time for us to think about the message that our children are getting everywhere, and to let them know that most people in the world are good, and that this is a rare and tragic happening, but to let them know that they're safe in our love all over the country. So I also want to thank the media for the way you're covering all of this, the respect and the dignity you're giving to the victims and the people all over our country who are suffering. So thank you all.
Are you going to be visiting other victims, or do you have plans to go to New York or go to the Pentagon?
Not right now. I've visited these three, but I may be visiting some others later. I'm going to try to talk tomorrow about specific ways we can help children deal with the trauma of this. And one thing all of us need to do also is help ourselves. If parents themselves are finding that they feel frightened or need some help, I know that churches and clinics and schools all over the country are supplying grief counselors, and this is a good time to avail yourself of those services if you need them, and to do the same thing for your children if you feel like your children need it.
What else will you be doing for children? You said you're going to try...
Tomorrow I'm going to talk specifically about...
Now you know why so many friends of the Bushes say that Laura Bush is the real quiet star of the Bush administration. First Lady visiting Walter Reed Hospital today, where she visited with 3 of the victims of the attack on the Pentagon yesterday. She'll be talking some about children. She said tomorrow it's obviously a great concern of hers. She's a former librarian. She made a big hit in the nation's capital last weekend with her first National Book Festival, authors reading up and down the mall and signing autographed copies of their book as well. So Laura Bush making a rare public appearance. Here in New York City, people are lined up giving blood at most of the hospitals lined up around the block, and many instances responding to the call that goes out. And so many people are still talking to one another, asking questions about friends or loved ones, family members who were in the World Trade Center when it came down yesterday and have not reappeared at any of the hospitals, have not checked in at home. The waiting game goes on as the search and rescue effort goes on as well. Pakistan will be a key player for the United States in all of this. Already Secretary of State Powell has been in touch with the Pakistani leaders, and we think that there's a delegation that has gone from Islamabad to Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan, to deliver a very stern message to the Taliban leaders who are believed to be harboring Osama bin Laden, saying this is not a time unless you welcome some kind of retribution from the United States to be doing just that. We had NBC's Ron Allen sent from London to Pakistan, and he filed this report just moments ago.
Sense in this part of the world, here in Pakistan, that an attack by the United States could be imminent just across the border in Afghanistan any moment now, any day now, I should say. Afghanistan, of course, is where Osama bin Laden is living, has been for some time. And the United States accuses Afghanistan of harboring and supporting him there. One of the most clear signs that an attack could come any time is that foreign aid workers in Afghanistan have been leaving in droves. The United States, the United Nations, I should say, expects to have all of its workers out of Afghanistan by tomorrow, just as a precaution for safety. There are more statements of innocence coming from Afghanistan today, even from bin Laden himself, through a close aide in an interview with an Arab journalist who was reportedly very close to bin Laden. In the interview, bin Laden said that he praises the people who were behind the attack on the World Trade Center towers, but he again denies any responsibility for this. This is all dangerous words, dangerous comments for the leaders of Afghanistan, who, again, the United States holds responsible for bin Laden. The United States has also been turning up the pressure on this government, Pakistan, saying that because Pakistan is one of the few countries in the world that supports, that recognizes the Taliban leadership in Afghanistan, the United States expects the Pakistani government to do everything it can to force Afghanistan to turn bin Laden over. But again, we're just hearing more tough talk from Afghanistan, which is why so many people here believe a strike could come from the U.S. very soon. Back to you in New York.
NBC's Ron Allen filing that report from Islamabad, Pakistan, just moments ago. In our Washington bureau now is the former defense secretary in the Reagan administration, Caspar Weinberger, who presided over raids on Libya and was in office when almost 300 American Marines were lost in a terrorist attack in Lebanon. They seem to be proceeding on two fronts urgently, understandably, Mr. Secretary. Militarily, they're deciding what their options may be. And NATO has said that they are invoking Article 5, which is any attack on any member of NATO is considered to be an attack on all the members of NATO. That's pretty critical because when you launched the attack against Libya, France didn't let you fly over its airspace.
That's correct. We had to go something like 1,800 miles with 3 extra refuelings at night and radio silence because of France's refusal to let us go over. In contrast, England let us use the bombers that were based in England without a moment's hesitation.
Based on what we know about the terrorist groups that we have been dealing with, and if in fact it is Osama bin Laden, this is going to be a different kind of military operation because he moves around so much and he's so hard to find, isn't he?
Well, I think that's correct, yes. We have to be sure who is responsible. Once we've identified with certainty the perpetrators of this, then I think we have a very simple option. There's only one, and that's to use every ounce of military strength and capability we have to destroy them. And I think that can be done. It needs the will of the people behind it, and it needs the will of our leadership. And I'm sure our leadership has that will right now without any question.
One of the first rules of warfare is to make sure that your own people are behind you.
Exactly.
And that you have a political foundation internationally as well in this case. And
Right.
It sounds like the president is going to be moving to get that in place before he decides on any military action.
Well, his father did that very well with the 31 nations lined up in the coalition in the Persian Gulf War, and I would think that most of those nations would have the same feeling we have about the effects of terrorism and how it must be stamped out as quickly and as effectively as possible. So I would hope that they would want to join in this effort. But whether or not they do, it's essential that we act and act as soon as we have, I think, identity and reasonable certainty of who's done it.
I don't know whether you heard Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, one of your successors, say just a few moments ago in a sharp warning to U.S. military personnel, do not get careless with classified material. Do not in some way try to make yourself out to be larger than you are by sharing it with other irresponsible people. He didn't single out the press, but it seemed to me that it was a very sharp warning because he didn't want to be reading or hearing about a military operation before it went into place.
Well, it's pretty disconcerting when you do that it does happen. There are people who like to indicate how important they are by saying that they're in the know and so forth and so on. But at times like this, absolute security is extremely important. And whatever we do is going to have the advantage of whatever surprise we can get behind it. That was one of the reasons that this horrible set of events yesterday succeeded, because it came right out of the blue, and there had been no indication, no warnings, or no indications that anything like this was about to happen. We would have to have the same kind of conditions when we decide how and when and against whom to retaliate.
All right, thank you very much, former Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger, who in fact was an aide to General Douglas MacArthur during World War
That's
II.
right. A long time ago.
Based in Manila. So he has seen a lot of United States military action in the course of his lifetime. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us.
Thank you, Don. Nice to see you.
Let's go to Norman Schwarzkopf now, who is the general in charge of the Allied forces during Operation Desert Storm. You clamped down pretty hard over there in terms of information. There was not a lot that leaked out in advance, as I recall, General Schwarzkopf.
You know, 14 years ago when I sat as a member at the meeting of the Joint Chiefs, then Admiral Crowell, the chairman, used to say, anything you put in writing in the Pentagon will be in the Washington Post in 3 days. Because of that, Colin Powell and I were very, very careful about what happened to anything that was in writing. As a matter of fact, we established a system where any time I sent him anything in writing or he sent me something in writing, it went directly from my hands to a member of my staff who sent it directly to a member of his staff who delivered it directly to him. That's how critical we felt it was to make sure we kept things, you know, classified that should be kept classified.
But would you also agree that a great deal of material is classified in kind of an arbitrary fashion that does not need to be classified?
Yeah, I think that there's some of that that goes on for really it's the bureaucracy at work. Those people that classify things are classifiers, okay? That's what they like to do. But I think that it is really, really dangerous when people start, you know, passing around information that they have about some operation, you know, even if they're just telling it to a friend, because that friend tells it to someone else. And, you know, I would also tell you that in the Arab world, they're notorious for not keeping a secret. you know, they like other people to know that they have a secret, and therefore, you know, they had a tendency to compromise classified information also. We had to watch all of that. Maybe it's a human tendency, but it's one that can be very, very dangerous to the people that are involved in military operations.
General Schwarzkopf, we do not yet know the exact nature of the military operation that will be put in place at some point. We only know that at some point that the United States will strike back. But in the last several years, it seems to me that this country has been lulled into the belief that military operations don't really have human consequences in terms of casualties on our side. The war in Kosovo, for example, which was conducted from 15,000 feet. But the kind of military operation that may be required here could very well be on the ground with a highly trained force of warriors who are going after someone.
Yeah, well, don't forget, even in Desert Storm, with all of the power we brought to bear from the air, eventually what won the war for us was soldiers on the ground, soldiers and Marines on the ground. And that is usually the case. Freedom is bought and paid for by the blood and the guts and the lives of our armed forces really on the ground. That's where it happens, and that's the cost of freedom in many cases in this country.
All right, General Norman Schwarzkopf, who will be with us throughout as we continue this reporting on the attack on America. We want to show you how swiftly things have changed in the last 24 hours. You used to look out at the horizon of the Atlantic Ocean, sparkling and clear. That's the USS George Washington off Long Island. It's been moved into New York's waters, standing vigilance, if you will, off Long Beach, New York. That's a stunning sight to see. Also, air cover was flown over the World Trade Center yesterday, unfortunately after the two attacks. And military forces around the world are in a very high state of alert, the highest, in fact, and I think that still is in place. NBC's Dan Abrams now in downtown New York, as we say, way downtown, and he's going to bring us up to date on what is going on. Dan?
Well, hi there, Tom. The rescue effort continues here. There are really three things they're doing back there behind me. Number one, most important, is the rescue effort, trying to find more people who are still alive in the rubble. Number two is a recovery effort, and that is finding the bodies and beginning the process of removing them. And number three is the beginning of the investigative process, and that is trying to find those black boxes, trying to find any evidence. But for many New Yorkers around here, all of that area, meaning the immediate area, the block or two right around the World Trade Center, is blocked off. But many people walking in the blocks just beyond that, in the blocks certainly impacted by this bombing. I took a walk around some of those blocks. Let's take a look. We're here in a block about a quarter mile from the World Trade Center. You can see that the buildings here are all intact. The pillars are still there. The windows all in place. But literally, if you move down the block, you can see some cars that have been moved here. And you can see the amount of soot and dirt on that car from the scene. This really hasn't been moved since it happened. But even more jarring, I think, is this scene right here. Look at these two cars placed on top of one another. I think when you think about the impact that these planes must have had, it's hard to visualize it because everything melted. But here, at least you have some remnants. You have literally an engine that is melded together with other parts of the car. Moving over, you've got another car they moved here. It looks like it's been through a war. You can see the papers, all the burned out papers from the building. You see the soot and the dirt, and it just shows you how devastating this blast was. Look across the street there. You've got a Con Ed truck that, you know, some of the Con Ed people now looking at, examining, trying to figure out which truck that actually was. But that truck, too, in terrible shape. So while many of the items, the steel, was literally melted, and it's not just charred cars on this street. You can see behind me this enormous piece of machinery that they are bringing in to help in the cleanup effort. There's a whole row of rescue vehicles behind it as well. Almost a surreal type of machinery being brought in here to try and help in the cleanup effort. Dan Abrams, NBC. So, Tom, you can see everywhere you walk around this neighborhood, there are either ambulances or cleanup gear, police, everywhere around here, and certainly just that alone just makes you feel the impact of everything that is continuing to happen around us. Tom?
Thanks very much, Dan Abrams. Somebody who was there yesterday in the midst of all that, as the buildings were collapsing around him, is 35-year-old Matt Long, a New York City firefighter. He was at the scene until 2 this morning. Mr. Long, do you have friends who are still missing there?
Possibly, yes.
What was it like when you got there?
We arrived before the building collapsed, and there was a lot of chaos. People were running, clearing the scene. And we were walking down West Street, probably about 4 blocks from the tower when it started to come down.
And were you engulfed in all the smoke and debris along with everyone else?
Yes, we were.
And once you were able to go back in, what did you find?
Just disaster. It took a while for the smoke and the soot to clear, but we just climbed over rubbles of cement and iron and just glass, crushed cars. It was a disaster.
Did you hear any voices calling for help?
No, we weren't that deep in where I can hear victims calling or anything, but we were just monitoring radios and doing our searches little by little.
And tell us about the debris itself. Is it densely packed? Is it unstable?
No, it's densely packed with some voids.
So it's a matter, as we now look at, they're cutting through steel girders and removing very heavy blocks of concrete before they can get very deep inside, right?
Yeah, I would imagine so. We'll probably be back down there tomorrow doing some more.
And as you work, the conditions are very difficult because it's hard to breathe, isn't it?
Correct. It was hard to breathe. A lot of the dust and soot was filled with little fiberglass fibers that were getting in your skin and your lungs. So you had to cover it up. But there was a lot of help there, a lot of firefighters there, policemen doing the right thing, getting there and trying to save some people.
What did you think when you heard that there may be more than 200 firefighters missing in that rubble?
It's very hard to swallow. A lot of them could be my friends. I'm hoping that there's voids where they're still alive, or maybe they were taken to some places where they just haven't been accounted for yet.
You have a family, Mr. Long?
No, I do not. I'm single.
It probably helps to be single at a time like this.
A little bit, but I have a brother on the job and a lot of close friends on the job.
Well, we know you've got to go back to work. You got off at 2 o'clock this morning. We thank you very much for stopping by, and on behalf not just of the city of New York, but the whole country, we're very grateful to the work that you all do.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Matt Long, who is a New York City firefighter from Ladder Company 43, he's going back to work. He got off at 2 o'clock this morning. They have a very difficult task ahead of them. John McCain joins us now, the Republican senator from Arizona, Vietnam War hero, a man who knows a lot about combat and the difficulty sometimes of finding and then striking at this kind of a target. First of all, the president seems to be building a political foundation before he launches any kind of a military operation, because at this point he does not yet know who we may be striking back against, Senator.
I think that's true. I think they're rapidly gathering evidence, but I don't, at least as far as I know, don't know if it's been conclusive or not. And also, whatever we decide to do militarily will require some preparation. I think that it's important for us to enter in a sustained kind of scenario as opposed to one attack or cruise missiles or otherwise. By the way, could I mention, you know, your book, The Greatest Generation, is a marvelous book about another generation. I think these firefighters would get a chapter in another Tom Brokaw book. They are the best of America, and we really cherish their service and sacrifice.
Senator, I agree with you wholeheartedly, but no one's going to believe that you did that spontaneously. They're sure that that was the price of admission to come on NBC. Would you please assure everyone that that was your idea and not mine?
I assure everyone that these firefighters and policemen, as well as all the thousands of other volunteers, have been the shining light in this very tragic story, and we're proud of them.
You're quite right. They are, in effect, our own domestic army. I felt that way in Oklahoma City when I saw the rescue efforts that were underway there, and you certainly feel that here with the New York City Police Department and the fire department. To go back to what the president is doing, an important condition has been put into place by NATO It's Article 5. That means that NATO is solidly behind the United States and treating this as an attack on each of its member nations as well. That's vital to the president as he builds a political foundation, Senator.
That's a fact. An attack on one is an attack on all. And so far, most of our allies have responded positively, and the president is working hard, as well as Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, in building that coalition. I think the president is using his father's coalition building efforts, which were so successful in the Persian Gulf War, as a model. And I think also we can ask for and receive the support of our Asian allies and allies throughout the world, not just our NATO allies.
Senator, tell me about the new environment on Capitol Hill. As you are keenly aware, you've been in the middle of a lot of this. There's been such deep and bitter partisan bickering, sometimes even within parties. Has all that changed as a result of this act of terrorist war?
I think it's changed, and I think that's what the American people would expect, and I think the change is genuine. How long it lasts, obviously, is another question, but right now, all partisanship, as far as I can tell, has totally disappeared, and I think that's a good thing.
You know, there are markers in history in which the country has changed. Pearl Harbor was one of them. 1963, when John F. Kennedy was killed, was another time. 1968 was another time. Do you think that America will be changed profoundly by this terrorist act?
I hope we're not changed profoundly, but I'm afraid that we are changed permanently. In other words, I'm not sure we will ever have the total confidence that we can live in a free and open society and have all the pleasures and joys of that society without certain restrictions. Certainly the most obvious is as far as aviation travel is concerned, but it may go significantly deeper than that. That's why it's so important that we remove this threat permanently, not just bin Laden, but the threat. There are other organizations out there that are bent on the destruction of the United States of America and everything we stand for. So I think this is a long struggle, and the reason why it needs to be a long struggle is so that we can do the best we can to preserve the American way of life.
Senator, thank you very much for being with us. I would be remiss if I didn't inquire about your health. How are you doing?
Just fine. Thanks for asking.
Okay, thank you, and love at home as well.
Thank you.
All right, Senator John McCain, who joins us now, he was one of the first senators to use the phrase "an act of war" yesterday, and then, of course, that was used by the president today. Let's show you some video that has just come in from London. This is Prince Charles signing a condolence card to the United States. He is in he's at the U.S. Embassy. He is in his naval uniform, not in civilian clothing. Prince Charles is beginning to take a more conspicuous and, again, public role now after the death of Diana. Socially, he has been seen publicly with Camilla Bowles, his longtime friend, entertaining Americans at Ascot, showing up at polo matches with her and with his two children, obviously. Prince Charles signing a condolence card at the U.S. Embassy today. We're going to see some voiceover of search efforts where? Okay. We're going to go back up close now and give you just an example of the daunting task before all of these workers. And think about that's only about 40 feet by 40 feet, and the footprint of these two buildings coming down is over a wide area of lower Manhattan. People have been down there, have been stunned by the size of the debris. So much of it has been reduced to little more than large rocks, and it's tightly compacted. So it's hard to imagine that as it came down all 110 stories that there could have been air pockets. But of course we do not want to give up hope on that possibility that people were able to find a way that they could survive. We still don't know an exact number of the people who were working in there at the time. Best estimates are 10,000, 15,000. The final death toll could be that high, and we have to steel ourselves for that possibility. Joining me now is former National Security Advisor Sandy Berger, who served in the Clinton administration, longtime national security expert in various administrations in Washington, primarily Democratic, I think that is fair to say. and he joins us now. Does the President and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, do they seem to be touching all the right bases at this point?
They certainly seem to, Tom, as I listened today, talking to our allies and proceeding with the law. Someone's talking in my ear here. I guess Tom's a little...
Okay, let's try to get that out. That could not be more distracting as those of us who have to do this all the time. Is it okay now, Sandy?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think you asked me...
Are they touching all the right bases in the administration?
It certainly seems that way today. The President has been on the phone with foreign leaders, as has Secretary Powell. The law enforcement activity is proceeding, and systematically we are moving both to deal with the aftermath of this essentially earthquake that hit New York and Washington yesterday. At the same time, we deliberately think through and plan our options going forward. We've entered an entirely new phase here, Tom, in the war against terrorism. What happened yesterday was obviously a major escalation, both in terms of capability and in terms of malevolent intent. And I think what we need now to do is proceed in a determined, resolved, but steady way. We don't have to be stampeded into instant action here. We have to know what our next step is and what our step is beyond that and our step beyond that, because this is going to be a protracted undertaking and not an easy one.
And it's going to be diplomatic and political and even economic to a degree, as well as military.
Yeah, first of all, I think we should understand that there already are very severe economic sanctions, again, assuming the path here leads to bin Laden, and I think the administration's been very careful to not reach a conclusion prematurely, but if things lead in that path, there are already very severe sanctions on Afghanistan economically. As you know, Afghanistan is a rather destitute, desperate, starving country. So the economic lever here has a probably limited value. But we need all of the countries in the world to step up the level of their priority to what is clearly a new phase of a war against terrorism.
All right, thank you very much, Sandy Berger, who is National Security Advisor under President Clinton. Let me just ask one more question, if I can, Sandy Berger. During the war against Kosovo, which was conducted primarily from the air, I know that you were very concerned about the political fallout if there were casualties on our side from a military point of view. But isn't the United States, the population in this country, going to have to face up to the fact to be effective militarily, it is going to unfortunately cost us casualties?
Well, I know we don't want to go back to Kosovo. I actually believe that the air campaign was the best way to conduct that war, and of course we prevailed. So, but without going backward, going forward to your question, you know, this is not going to be a problem solved from a long distance. We're 1,000 miles from international waters. Cruise missiles are not rifles. And the range of military options here that will be considered by the administration, I think, is a broad one. But we also need to recognize that they're all difficult options. The last military force that was in Afghanistan was the Soviet Union, of course, unsuccessfully. But I think everything has to be on the table.
All right, thank you very much, Sandy Berger, who is National Security Advisor under President Clinton. Let's go to the White House now, and NBC's Campbell Brown, who has the latest for us from there. Campbell?
Well, Tom, as you may have heard from Ari Fleischer, the White House press secretary, a short time ago, they are clearly now defending the decision to keep the president out of Washington yesterday during the aftermath of the attacks. Fleischer saying today that there is specific and credible information that the White House was a target, as was Air Force One. Fleischer saying that the plane that crashed into the Pentagon was in fact targeting the White House. And Tom, the information we're getting from military sources is that plane, the one that crashed into the Pentagon, initially passed the Pentagon, flew over the U.S. Capitol, came back past the White House, again passed over the Pentagon, and did sort of a loop before it crashed into the Pentagon. What Fleischer was not able to clear up for us was why the plane was diverted back to the Pentagon. We have heard from military sources that there were fighter jets in the air. We do not know if there was any sort of interaction or they may have diverted them. Fleischer also today confirming that there was a threat against Air Force One, but again giving no detail at all as to what that threat was, except to say that they were informed while the president was traveling from Sarasota, Florida to Barksdale Air Force Base that indeed there was a credible threat against Air Force One. And that's why yesterday we saw those pictures of Air Force One flying at 40,000 feet and especially high altitude with fighter jets on either wing. Again, the White House defending the decision to keep him out of Washington until late yesterday afternoon. Tom?
Campbell Brown, that will continue, of course, to get a lot of examination from the White House press corps and from others. By the way, Congressman Bob Barr of Georgia has written a letter to Speaker Dennis Hastert of the House of Representatives promoting a bill that would override a presidential executive order that prohibits U.S.-sanctioned assassinations. It's called the Terror Elimination Act. I think it was passed during the during the Carter administration. So far, only 3 known sponsors in the House of Representatives, in addition to Congressman Barr. It was introduced by Barr months ago. It's certainly going to be coming back to the House floor, no doubt. We want to share with you now a debate that was done earlier today by my colleague Matt Lauer on the Today Show with the mother of one of the people who was on the United flight that was crashed into the ground outside of Pittsburgh. Her name is Alice Hoagland. Here now, Matt Lauer and Alice Hoagland.
Moments before jetliners were deliberately crashed, there were a series of chilling phone calls made by victims aboard those doomed planes. Alice Hoagland got one such call from her son. Ms. Hoagland, our condolences to you.
Appreciate that.
Your son, Mark Bingham, was on board United Airlines Flight 93. That's the plane that took off from Newark, bound for San Francisco, and the plane that eventually crashed in Pennsylvania.
That's right.
Can you tell me about the call you received?
Yes, we got a call at about 6:45 in the morning yesterday. The house is full of people because we just have new babies in the house. A friend answered it. Carol Phipps went and got Mark's Aunt Kathy. Kathy spoke to him first. He told her, "I love you," and she said, "Mark, we love you very much." And then Kathy ran and got me, and Mark said, "Mom, this is Mark Bingham. I love you. First of all, I want to tell you guys I love you." And I repeated, "Mark, we love you very much." And he said, "I'm on a flight from," he identified it to Kathy as Flight 93, United Flight 93, from Newark to San Francisco, and the plane has been taken over by 3 guys, he said, who say they have a bomb. And I asked him, "Mark, who are these people?" And he didn't hear me, didn't get the question, didn't answer it, was distracted. And I asked the question again. I heard some commotion in the background. Mark seemed to be talking to someone else, or someone was talking to him. And then the phone went dead. He told me at some point during the conversation that he was not calling me with his cell phone. He was using the air phone, probably at his seat. We know from other sources that he was sitting in seat 4D, which is first class on this United flight. I'm a flight attendant for United Airlines, as is my sister Candace Hoagland, and Mark was flying on her companion pass. That's how they knew to contact us. It's
Ms. Hoagland,
terrible.
You say you heard some commotion in the background. Can you describe that for me?
Well, the FBI has asked us similar questions, asked us if we heard Mark mention anything beside the bomb. He made no mention of knives or box cutters or guns or any other weapons. He mentioned the 3 guys. He wasn't able to get out word about their description, who he thought they might be. I couldn't make out anything distinct from the background. I was trying hard to hear his voice, which was coming over clearly, when he was speaking, he spoke fairly slowly, calmly, although I could tell he was under a great deal of duress.
After the phone went dead, Ms. Hoagland, how long was it after that that you heard that indeed that plane had crashed?
The call came in about 6:45. We understand that the plane crashed about 7 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And so I guess probably by the time he hung up with us, or the phone went dead, it was about 3 minutes. That he had about 12 more minutes to live, I guess. We hope that Mark was able to take a proactive part in thwarting these hijackers. So I have hopes that he was able to. He was in a good position. He was forward in the aircraft, could probably be in full view of everything that was going on, probably saw what happened in the cockpit. He was a very active, take charge, assertive young man. We have it from other people, another man on the aircraft who called his wife, who said that he and some other passengers were hoping to get at these guys somehow. So this was the only flight of the 4 that did not reach its target, which they believed to be Camp David, and that gives us reason to think that perhaps Mark was able to help save the lives of people on the ground.
Yeah, there was another cell phone call made from someone who'd locked himself in a rear bathroom who said that we're going to have to do something because it appears we're going to die either way, and we have to try something. I mean, it appears that something heroic did take place on that flight.
I firmly believe that. Mark has been in a clinch in times past and has come through with flying colors. He's a Cal grad, rugby player, very assertive guy, aggressive, and smart, and we love him very much. We're going to miss him.
I can only, you know, I think this might be a weird way to describe this, Miss Hoagland, but the phone call in some ways has to be thought of as a gift.
Oh, we were very comforted to be able to get the news from Mark himself. Somehow it made it much easier to take. It's awful. It's a national time of mourning for all of us, so I'm just one of many, many people. We're so touched by the words of our president, by the words of the Congress people, hearing America being sung on the steps of the Capitol building. It's just profoundly moving for me. I'm delighted to see this rebirth of patriotism among the American people. We need to be strong and work together to overcome this hatred that's taken us over.
Well, you are amazingly strong given the circumstances, Ms. Hoagland, and our condolences, our severe and sincere condolences to you and your family.
Our whole family appreciates it very much. I'm delighted to be able to express to the world how much we loved Mark being my son.
He sounds like an amazing young man. Ms. Hoagland, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That riveting and memorable interview today by Matt Lauer with the mother of a young man who called from Flight 93 to say that they were being hijacked and that he and 2 other men were going to try to do something about it. It is that plane that crashed outside of Pittsburgh. It had made a U-turn after leaving Newark, and it was headed back toward the Washington, D.C. area. And as she said, we can only hope that he took a proactive role. Alice Hoagland herself, a United Airlines flight attendant. Her grief, obviously, and her pride in her son is being played out across America for all those families that had people on board those airliners, and the families here in New York and also in the Washington, D.C. area who are awaiting some accounting of their missing loved ones, and our hearts go out to them as well. Ahmed Maher is the Egyptian foreign minister, and he joins us now from Cairo. Foreign Minister Maher, the tricky part now for the United States and for moderate Arab nations, including Egypt, is to find some kind of common ground in this war against terrorism. Would you agree?
Yes, I agree with that. We have condemned this despicable act that took place, this act of terrorism. We believe that the attack on civilians and on important buildings in New York and Washington is something that we should all stand against. We should stand against any aggression. We should stand against any aggression against civilians. We should stand against any attempt to destabilize any nation.
What role will Egypt play in this war on terrorism that the President has talked about in this country?
Let me remind you that a few years ago, President Mubarak suggested an international conference on terrorism. Unfortunately, the idea was not accepted at the time, and we believe that terrorism is addressed to everybody, and we should all work together to combat it. And this is our position. This has always been our position, and we continue to support the idea of cooperation between different countries against terrorism.
Would you agree, even if some of Egypt's adversaries are included in that effort?
Well, it's not a question of adversaries. I don't think any country condones terrorism. If there are people who belong to a country that resort to terrorism, this should not mean that we should generalize against the whole country or a whole community. I believe that it is too early to pronounce any indictment. I think that the inquest has just started, and I would not want to speculate, and I do not want other people to speculate, because these speculations had led to some Muslim women, some Arab women to have been mistreated in the streets of New York and Atlanta and other states.
Yeah, we have
I believe that we should keep our calm and not come to conclusions before the inquest is ended.
Yeah, we couldn't agree with you more, and we have been speaking out strongly here during the course of this day about tolerance for people who happen to be Arab Americans, law-abiding citizens who also condemn this act of terrorism. But in fact, this is not just heedless speculation. No, wait, Mr. Foreign Minister, if I may ask you, if we do discover, as it does seem increasingly clear that we might, that it was Osama bin Laden, that he is being harbored in Afghanistan, and that the United States attacks not only Osama bin Laden, but the country that has been harboring him, what would be Egypt's reaction to that?
We believe in the rule of law. I think there are rules, international law, and we should resort to the ways and means dictated by international law and by the international organizations.
So are you saying that if the United States...
I do not believe every country should take revenge.
But if a country is harboring, a terrorist who is responsible for this act, that country is equally culpable in the act, is it not?
Well, it depends on the relationship between such a country and the terrorists. But as I say again, we should abide by the rule of law. I don't believe that unilateral action is warranted. I believe that countries have a right of self-defense, but they should resort to international organizations and international law. This is the rule. And I'm sure that the United States, as a country that respects the rule of law, will abide by these laws.
All right, thank you very much. Ahmed Mara, who is the Egyptian foreign minister. We're joined now on the telephone by a retired senior pilot for Delta Airlines, Neil Soderman, who's a veteran pilot of 757s and 767s. Mr. Soderman, would it be difficult for someone who had learned to fly a twin-engine, piston-driven plane to get into the left-hand or right-hand seat of a 757 and steer it into the World Trade Center?
No, it wouldn't, Tom. If someone had as little as 100 hours of flying time in a twin-engine airplane, they would have the ability to steer an airplane already airborne into the World Trade Center. However, they couldn't get in the airplane at the gate, get it to the end of the runway, get to altitude. They would be unable to do that. The other interesting point is it would be much easier to hit the World Trade Center than to hit a target on the ground, i.e. the White House or the Capitol building. I understand from watching the news that the airplane that hit the Pentagon was targeted the White House. That would be a much harder objective for someone with very limited flying skills.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to determine yet, whether in fact the White House was the original target. of the plane that was flown into the Pentagon. We do know that the plane made one pass over the Pentagon, then over the Capitol, then went back over the Potomac River and headed for the Pentagon. But if that pilot could make those maneuvers over the Pentagon, then over the Capitol, why would it be so hard to hit a target on the ground?
Hitting a spot on the ground may seem simple, but it's harder than it seems. Hitting a 110-story office building, a large vertical structure, would be much, much easier. And I think the data will show that he missed his target.
Mr. Soderman, obviously those hijackers also knew that they should shut off the transponders.
They could have learned that on the internet. They could have learned it at any of a dozen flight schools around the United States. If you fly light airplanes, you become knowledgeable about transponders.
All right. Neil Soderman, former flight instructor for Delta Airlines and a veteran of many hours in the air for Delta Airlines and former Air Force pilot as well. Thanks, Neil, for being with us and sharing with us that view from the cockpit. Neil Soderman in Atlanta, Georgia. We want to tell you that that coming up in just a few moments, many of your local television stations will be going to their local news. Others will be continuing our coverage here with NBC's Brian Williams. To bring you up to date, an international coalition is being constructed by the President of the United States and Secretary of State Colin Powell. Don Rumsfeld has put all military service personnel on alert. They should be very careful with classified material. The White House is saying that the White House itself and Air Force One were targets of the hijackers. They have credible evidence to that effect, but they're not sharing it at this hour. And the FBI reports no arrests have been made thus far. And we still don't have a firm count from either the Pentagon or from the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. I'm Tom Brokaw. I'll see you tonight on NBC Nightly News.
This is a News 10 NBC special report. America under siege.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Martin. I'm Gabe Dalmuth. Brett and Shelley are on assignment in New York City and in Washington. It's just one more day like no other this generation or any other generation has ever seen.
Now, we want to give you the very latest local developments after this attack on America. The Rochester Airport remains closed down at this hour. The Red Cross turned people away from blood donation sites today, but they're urging you to call and see where you can go. The Salvation Army is looking for donations of money to send bottled water to New York City. And we will have a complete list of local community prayer services tonight. You'll see live reports from around Rochester on all these stories in just a moment.
And this is what it looks like right now at Ground Zero. Let's take a look at video. Smoke continues to billow from the site where the towers went down. Rescue crews have pulled a woman out of the wreckage alive. Crews also found 3 police officers alive earlier today. Only 7 stories of the North Tower remain standing. The South Tower is a 2-story high heap of rubble. New York City's Mayor Rudy Giuliani says thousands of people may have been lost in each of the buildings. We're efforting a live report from Shelley Rabando in New York City.
Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., government officials now think the plane that crashed into the Pentagon was headed for the White House. Federal agents spent the day combing the grounds near the Pentagon's crash site. They're looking for clues that could help in the investigation. Rescuers say they've given up hope of finding survivors in the wreckage, but officials now say the death toll is likely much lower than the 800 that had been reported.
In Boston this afternoon, police wearing full riot gear stormed into a hotel and took away 1 person. The FBI refused to confirm any arrests. Also, as part of that investigation, police evacuated guests at that 36-story hotel, the Westin Copley, in Boston's Back Bay section.
President Bush gave another speech to the nation this morning in the White House. He asked everyone to lower all American flags to half-staff. The president continued to show outrage at the horrific attack.
Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever.
President Bush says our nation will spend whatever it takes to find the people responsible for yesterday's attacks. Brett Davidson is in the nation's capital with 10 NBC photographer Gary Otto. We're expecting a live report from them later in our newscast with the very latest from Washington.
Flights nationwide are still grounded and Rochester's airport remains closed. Today, the FAA announced strict new guidelines to protect our travelers from further terrorism. Ray Lovato joins us live at the Rochester International Airport with the latest. Ray?
Well, Gabe, the airport remains eerily empty. I mean, there's no one here, and the planes sit on the tarmac. And when the airport reopens perhaps tomorrow, there will be new beefed up security here and at airports around the country. That almost certainly means there will be added delays, especially at the larger hubs.
We're going to go to all the steps necessary to make sure that the traveling public is safe and secure.
With those words, county officials reassured airline passengers. This after they met with representatives from all the airlines that serve Rochester. Drug-sniffing dogs made a sweep of the terminal, and planes parked on the tarmac. The FAA has ordered a long list and changes of airport security. Among them, all curbside check-ins be eliminated. Passengers will probably be screened more than once. People with e-tickets will no longer be able to board planes without first providing documentation. The county will also restrict vehicles in front of the terminal. People will no longer be able to sit in their cars and wait for friends or family.
We no longer will allow standing vehicles, parked vehicles, and definitely unoccupied vehicles will be removed immediately.
More sheriff's deputies will also be assigned to the airport, and they will be stationed closer to security checkpoints to be able to respond quicker and with dogs if needed.
Obviously, this is a draw on our staffing, and we're going to see what we can do to make sure that we do have appropriate security measures in place, but also have it be staff efficient.
We're looking at a live picture of about 5 sheriff's deputies' cars, and of course there are many others around the grounds here. The FAA is also proposing to bring back armed sky marshals aboard airplanes. That's one of their proposals. Of course, as soon as we know when the airport will be open, we will alert you at home. Reporting live from Brooks Avenue, Ray Lovato, News 10 NBC.
So many of you here in Rochester are wondering just what you can do to help. Rochester Red Cross says there are some important things you need to know before you give blood. Medical reporter Robin DeWind is live in our newsroom with those answers. Robin?
Well, Brian, people are asked to be patient. So many of you have turned out to donate blood, and the lines have been long, so much so that the Red Cross today had to turn people away because they're filled to capacity. You are asked to do one thing. Call the number on your screen, 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. It will give you the donation site nearest you, but there are still many things that people can do to help those in New York City.
We have 350 people ahead of you to be processed today.
It's a line most people don't seem to mind. Red Cross blood donation sites across the Rochester area are packed. Ellis Proya waited in line all day yesterday. She was turned away and told to come back today. She did.
And I just decided that I was going to come back today, and no matter what, I was going to give blood.
There were so many people, the Red Cross asked people to stay home today.
We are, at this time, full to capacity for today's donations, even though they're running to 10 o'clock. But tomorrow's blood drives will be running from 1 to 7 at the Grease Blood Donation Center and from 1 to 7 here at Prince Street.
Anyone who is a universal donor, which is O negative and can show proof, is invited to come out tonight. Otherwise, people are asked to donate later this week. Yesterday alone, the local Red Cross collected 3,000 units of blood. That's about a 3-day supply. By the end of today, they expect to have collected at least a week's worth.
Additionally, any excess donations that are not used meeting local needs or the needs in New York and Washington, D.C., we're investigating freezing those units so that they can be used as a strategic blood reserve.
But people are not just giving blood. More than $30,000 for disaster relief has been collected in just 2 days. This morning, the Davenport Hatch Foundation, a charitable trust organization, made a big commitment.
We have a check for you, Kyle, for $100,000 there.
The United Way stepped in with a donation of $25,000. Whether it's money or a gift of blood, this is a time when people in Rochester can make a difference in the lives of those so far away.
Down in New York, and they're going to need the blood, and right now it's just about all you can do.
If you would like to make a financial contribution to help people in New York City, you can call 241 4417. Now, local doctors are volunteering to help people in the New York City area if needed. Dr. Richard Gangemi is heading up a team of doctors and specialists, nurses, and physicians assistants from Rochester General Hospital. A total of 65 medical personnel from our entire area are on standby. It's still unclear if they will need to go. More than 7,000 medical personnel from across the state have already volunteered to help victims. Now, 4 people from the Monroe County Health Department are already in New York City. They are helping to perform autopsies. Reporting live from the newsroom, medical reporter Robin DeWind, News 10 NBC.
All right, Robin, thanks for that report. The local chapter of the Salvation Army is also asking for your help with the relief efforts in New York City. Kristen Salome is live at its local headquarters with details on that. Kristen?
Well, Gabe, lots of people have been calling here asking what they can do to help out. Certainly the Salvation Army is another one of those organizations we turn to in times of national crisis like this. And the best way to help them is to call the number on your screen and donate money. The big demand right now is bottled water for rescue workers in the city. They need it not only to drink, but also to wash with. We've seen the pictures showing how dusty it is down there. It's certainly easy to understand why they need that water. The Salvation Army is preparing to send at least 600 cases of the bottled water to New York City tonight, but they've yet to figure out how to pay for it all. That's where we can all pitch in with donations. The executive director says they've already received calls from dozens of people who want to help.
We keep getting calls for individuals who want to volunteer their services, some who have expertise in certain areas. We have church groups, scouting groups that want to contribute money and get involved to help people who have been through a terrible, terrible tragedy.
Now here's your chance to do your part. You can call the number on your screen, 987-9500. Don't bring down bottled water here, though. They already have that in the works. It's already being palleted up and getting ready to go. So the best way to help out, again, is through financial donations. Of course, we'll have more on what the Salvation Army is doing coming up later on at 5:30 and 6. Reporting live from the Liberty Pole Way, Kristen Salome, News 10 NBC.
Kristen, thank you. When a local business owner asked for a little help for rescue workers, the Rochester community responded in a big way. Mike Cohn owns New York Police Supply in Irondequoit. He asked the community to donate bedding to send to rescue workers in New York City and was completely overwhelmed by the response. So many people came out, Irondequoit police had to help direct traffic. A Wegmans truck packed up the donations and headed to New York City.
Well, they've got firemen and police between shifts sleeping on the streets, sleeping on the floors because they're not going home. They're staying there, and most of them are working double shifts and then taking a couple hours to nap.
Mike says they got so many cots, blankets, and pillows today, they do not have room in the trucks to take any more donation. Condolences to families of emergency workers buried in the rubble. Rochester firefighters have volunteered to help out in New York if they're needed. Like departments across the country, Rochester crews undergo anti-terrorism training. The chief says his department has received several federal grants for equipment upgrades and training. It's experience they hope they never have to use.
We have an individual dedicated to giving his life to cause as much destruction to life and property as possible for a cause that he believes in. There's no way you can prepare for that.
One Rochester firefighter is already at the World Trade Center helping in the search for survivors. And local state police are also lending a hand in New York City. 53 troopers from Troop E here in our region left this morning. They will assist the huge search and rescue effort. And local National Guards men and women remain on alert, ready to leave Rochester at a moment's notice. Governor George Pataki has called up several thousand members of the New York National Guard to help clear the rubble of the 2 demolished skyscrapers. Governor George Pataki toured the epicenter of the attack last night. He walked to several sites to get horrific damage. And he showed his gratitude to several emergency workers for their hard work. To one firefighter, he said, quote, "We're going to get through this because of you." Most of New York City remained closed today. Now, News 10 NBC's Shelley Ribando is in New York City right now. She has been stuck in gridlock, as you can imagine, all day as the rescue efforts continue, but she finally arrived there yesterday, and she joins us live now from Manhattan with the very latest from down there. Shelley, what can you tell us?
Gabe, yeah, I can barely hear you. I'm going to use the phone to talk to you. We're live on 22nd Street, which is lower Manhattan, right along the Hudson River. Behind me, you can see in the background, we are a distance from the World Trade Center area. That's because they blocked off a lot of roads to motorists. Earlier today, we parked and we walked down to as far as we could get to the scene, and the closer we got, the thicker the smoke. In fact, we were walking around and people were covering their faces, and we were down in that area for quite a while, and our nose and everybody was sneezing, our nose, our eyes, our throats were all irritated. You can just imagine what it's like for people who live down there, who did have access to go back to their apartments today. The rescue crews also having a tough time getting through the rubble. Earlier today, New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani spoke about the latest efforts.
We would urge people to go back to normal as much as possible, to go to restaurants, go shopping, do things, show that you're not afraid, and show confidence in yourself and in the city.
Some people are very scared and concerned. Others say life goes on, they're getting back to business. As you can see, is going on. There is that hustle and bustle of New York City that you expect. We'll have more coming up tonight on Express News at 5:30. Reporting live from Manhattan, Shelley Rabando, News 10, NBC.
All right, Shelley, thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Gabe. Well, students and staff at McQuaid High School are praying for the best tonight. 2 people with ties to the school were at the World Trade Center when it was attacked. Gary Liberatore joins us live from still missing.
Well, Brian, they are a very prayerful day here at McQuaid Jesuit High School today. A former student and the father of a former student still missing at this hour in New York City. First, 1995 graduate Brandon Buchanan. His office was on the 104th floor of the Trade Center North Tower. Thomas Duffy, who was the father of a 1998 McQuaid graduate, was at the Trade Center on business yesterday. Duffy works for an insurance brokerage firm, Marsh USA, in Linden Oaks in Penfield. Family members tell me his meeting there was on the 99th floor of the first tower that was hit. Meanwhile, students here at McQuaid prayed before class today. Many members of the faculty here know Brandon Buchanan well, including Father Fred Betty, who taught Brandon religion for 3 years.
I think what we're seeing is, after the initial shock of yesterday, we're seeing students reacting to the reality of now, the uncertainty.
And faculty and students are just praying for the best. They're praying that these 2 people are one of the miracles that may come out of this rubble. Reporting live from Brighton, Gary Liberatore, News 10, NBC.
All right, Gary, one of Rochester's largest law firms still has 7 people missing from the World Trade Center. Harris Beach Wilcox had offices on the 85th floor of one of the towers. We can tell you that some of the local employees did make it home safely to Rochester last night. Well, for many of us, for all of us, this tragedy is hard enough to digest, so imagine what it's like for a child who just turned on the television and is seeing a repeated image of airplanes crashing into buildings and death. Education reporter Elizabeth Chernak joins us now live with some tips on how to deal with this crisis with your children. Elizabeth?
Gabe, situations like this definitely make conversations around the dinner table quite difficult, but it's something that needs to be discussed. A clinical psychologist from Strong Hospital has a few tips for parents. Let your children ask you questions about what happened. Talk about their feelings and concerns. Share your feelings with them. Talk about good people, about helping the people who were hurt, perhaps donating their allowance to help victims. Limit how much exposure your youngest children are getting to the violence. Keep your child's routine, same bedtime, etc. And most importantly, talk about the terrorism with your children. Just make the conversations age appropriate.
Like a preschooler, you might explain it as there was a very big fire in a building and a lot of people got hurt. So it may be a very simple explanation. There doesn't need to be a lot of detail. With a school-age child, it might be that people who wanted to hurt other people took airplanes and crashed them into buildings, and a lot of people got hurt.
If your child is having difficulty sleeping, having nightmares, or is dealing with stress that's interfering with their routine, psychologists suggest you look into getting professional help. Elizabeth Chernak, News 10 NBC.
Locally, hundreds of Rochesterians are sending their thoughts and support. We want to share with you some of the emails that we have received here at the station. Jeff writes, I go back to the words of our founding fathers, one nation under God, indivisible. If we will unite and turn back to the Father who ordained and made provision for this great nation, What Satan and his henchmen intended for evil, our God will turn for good. And April writes, as the daughter of a World War II vet, I am disturbed by the day's events, and I'm not really sure how to explain to my 2 young daughters why someone would do this to our country and how it will affect them in the future. You can send your comments to us at 10nbc.com. We will share more of those comments later in the newscast.
Now, bringing you Western New York's most advanced forecasting technology, here's meteorologist Kevin Williams in the 10NBC Weather Lab.
And a very good afternoon to one and all. Certainly you couldn't be faulted if you didn't notice how beautiful the weather was here today. And fortunately the weather continues to be good in the recovery and rescue efforts in New York City and in Washington. Wanted to begin with a comment I heard on the network today. I think this sums it up pretty well. The reason that the eagle is a national symbol is because it is the one bird that can survive the storm. And we certainly will do that. We have some storms out in the tropical waters of the Atlantic that bear watching. This is Hurricane Erin tracking away from the U.S. mainland. This is Tropical Storm Felix. No threat to any land areas at this time. We'll keep our eyes on this tropical depression on the west coast of Florida that could become Tropical Storm Gabrielle and affect the southeast and perhaps the east coast over time in a matter of days from now. Right now, though, it's a bright, sunny, beautiful day in Rochester and western New York and the Finger Lakes. 79 degrees presently at the airport. The dew point way down, the air is dry, the breeze southerly, but it will not be this warm again for quite some time. We do have some substantial changes ahead. Lots of sunshine again, as I said today. Notice, though, a band of clouds over the upper Midwest. That is a cold front, and that front does mean business. It will arrive tomorrow with some breezes, a few showers, and the coolest air here, the chilliest air here since at least early to mid-May. You can see the setup on the forecast weather map. High pressure dominates, so up and down the eastern seaboard, with the exception of Florida. Plenty of sunshine today. There's the front we're watching, and again, ahead of it, clouds will increase later tonight. Showers will develop tomorrow, could be a thunder shower, and then behind that front, very chilly air arrives. So chilly, in fact, that there is the potential of a light frost in some of the southern valleys in our region come early Saturday morning. The weekend itself, though, looks bright and sunny all across western New York, but decidedly on the cool side. So here's the way the forecast shapes up. The evening, again, will be lovely weather-wise, and it'll cloud up later tonight. It will be a mild night relatively, and the overnight low will be down to about 62. Tomorrow, we see a changeable sky. A lot of clouds, though. There'll be a couple of showers, maybe an early day rumble of thunder. The afternoon turns quite breezy and noticeably cooler. Early highs, low 70s, and then temperatures will drop on through the 60s as the afternoon wears on. Here's the way the 5-day shapes up. On Friday, a brisk, chilly breeze. Clouds, some limited sun, high temperatures in the upper 50s. Again, the chance of some light frost early Saturday morning. The weekend itself, though, looks bright and sunny with highs in the low to mid 60s. And for the recovery effort, there is the concern of some rain moving in later Thursday night and Friday in New York City. Otherwise, though, through the weekend, the weather should cooperate with the efforts to the
But that actually might diminish some of the dust that's still hanging out.
Yeah, I suppose that's true,
too. That's good.
Yeah.
A little moisture.
I don't know. That might be the case, yeah.
Well, America is taking a serious stance to prevent any future terrorist attacks after yesterday's massive blow to our country. Here's a picture of the USS George Washington. It is now stationed just off the coast of New York City to protect our nation, of course. More evidence has surfaced today tying Osama bin Laden with yesterday's terrorist attacks. The known terrorist is believed to be hiding in Afghanistan. That country is busy today trying to distance itself from bin Laden in hopes of preventing an attack from the U.S.
And again, NBC News learned exclusive information that the plane that hit the Pentagon was intended for the White House. Security is extra tight around the White House and in the entire city right now. The FBI is combing the grounds of the Pentagon for any clues into the attack. News 10 NBC's Brett Davidson joins us now live in Washington, D.C. with the very latest. Brett?
Well, Brian, it's been quite a day here. We were able to get quite close to the Pentagon building today until we were ushered away by security, and I can tell you that the images over there are unforgettable. The destruction is absolutely unbelievable, and even the smoke today is just unavoidable. But rescue efforts have now become recovery efforts by firefighters over at the Pentagon. Defense Department officials say no more survivors are expected to be pulled from the rubble and the fires caused by terrorists yesterday. As morning broke, it became clear the tragic events of yesterday were not just a bad dream. This nightmare is very real. Smoke continued to billow from the Pentagon this morning as firefighters tried to contain the fire so they could get to the grim task of removing the victims.
I was like a little shaken when it happened.
Julian Jones witnessed the jetliner slam into the Defense Department headquarters. That's where he works. He came back today still in utter disbelief.
And I saw when it hit it. I mean, it just hit it and the smoke came and everything. So a lady, I got my van and I asked the lady behind me, I said, did you see that? She said, yeah. I said, yeah, I saw it too. So she started praying.
In Washington, people are back to work, including employees of the Pentagon, trying to return to a normal routine, but knowing that life is far from being back to normal.
We'll not ever be the same for this. The loss, we haven't even begun to calculate it. It's catastrophic.
The Pentagon has long stood as an American symbol of might, an impenetrable fortress that houses the United States Defense Department. Now, amid the smoke and the debris, its vulnerability and the vulnerability of America is apparent. The destruction has brought out the curious, the patriotic, and the angry, all fixated on the cavernous hole in the side of the building. When you look at that, what do you see?
Destruction, death. I mean, I just feel sorry for all the families. This does not have to occur on our soil. You know, we have the power to feed half the world. We have the power to exterminate half the world.
It has been another day of stark images. We did see FBI agents lined up this afternoon, forming a human chain, shoulder to shoulder, walking in step, looking for evidence along the grassy grounds around the Pentagon. Also, teams have found part of the fuselage, although we're told no large parts remain. Agents are still looking for the flight data and cockpit voice recorders as well. We should also tell you that lingering smoke inside the Pentagon today prompted a short evacuation, although a spokesperson says that was a false alarm. Reporting live in Washington, D.C., Brett Davidson, News 10 NBC.
Brett, in regards to some of the casualties in the Pentagon, there have been differing reports, anything from 100 all the way up to 800 casualties in this event. Can you talk about that at all for us?
Yeah, we are getting some new numbers today. We had heard 100 to 800, and if there's any encouraging news to come out of this, it's that maybe the high-end projections, the worst projections of the death toll over at the Pentagon may have been too high. Right now, senior Pentagon officials are saying it's more likely to be closer to the 100 versus the high end at 800.
Okay, a little bit of good news on this day. Brett Davidson reporting live in Washington, D.C. Thanks.
Secretary of State Colin Powell says the people behind these terrorist attacks will not get away with it and is speaking with leaders around the world preparing for a response. Secretary Powell also urged Americans to return to pull together in these trying times.
We have to still try to return life to a sense of normalcy. We cannot be a people who are afraid to live. We cannot be a people who will move away from a relatively open society. We cannot be a people who walk around terrified. We're Americans. We don't walk around terrified.
Powell says it's still too early to say for sure who the bombers were. Schools and churches are holding special vigils locally and services to pray for our country and its victims. Education reporter Elizabeth Chernak joins us once again to tell us about a vigil at Webster High School. Elizabeth?
Well, Gabe, for many of us, as you know, one of the things we can offer those in New York City, Washington, and Pittsburgh is prayer. Before school started at Webster High School this morning, dozens of students did just that. At 7 o'clock, they gathered around the flagpole. For about a half hour, students held each other's hands and bowed their heads in silence. After the vigil, students were left to talk about the impact of terrorism.
Because of the tragedy, we're all shocked to see that even America is not invincible. And since our generation hasn't lived through any major world conflict that we're involved in at all, we sort of take for granted the freedoms and the rights that we get every day.
Webster High School's prayer vigil was optional. Students were not required to go and to pray. With Project Education, Elizabeth Chernak, News 10 NBC.
Now tonight at 6, there's a community prayer service at St. Stanislaus Church at Hudson and Norton in the city. Another at the Victory Baptist Church across from the Holidome in Henrietta at 7 o'clock. The Good Shepherd Church on East Henrietta Road at 7 p.m. and the Geneseo United Methodist Church on Route 63 at 7:30 and 8 o'clock. Asbury First United Methodist Church will hold a prayer service at 8 p.m.
course, Rochester, along with the rest of the nation, is pulling together in this time of national tragedy. We all seem to be of the same mind and feeling, really walking around kind of in a daze. Viewers have sent in almost 200 emails to us reacting to the events. Rosemary Hickey of Geneva writes, "The devastation in our country today has hit all over the world. My son was to leave for Ireland tomorrow to study there. The fear I have for him is enormous, but it cannot compare with the loss of loved ones in New York City and in Washington. I also have friends that work at American Express Financial Tower next to the World Trade Center. My prayers are with all the victims and their family and friends. God, please bless our country." Nancy writes, "This is a catastrophic event in history. Not only is there an incredible loss of life, but America will be forever changed. My thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the victims. May God help the American people through this time of crisis."
And D. Larson writes, "I cannot describe the bitterness and sorrow in my heart over this tragedy. This is definitely the worst tragedy this country has ever experienced." You can log on to 10NBC.com. You can tell us your comments. We will read more of those comments on the air throughout this newscast.
Flights nationwide are still grounded, and Rochester's airport remains closed at this hour. Today, the FAA announced strict new guidelines to protect our travelers from further terrorism. Recapping now, our top stories. Rochester is helping out in a big way. Rural Metro ambulance crews have been sent to New York City. 15 paramedics packed up their ambulances overnight and left Rochester at 4 this morning. They will be relieving emergency workers who have worked for almost 2 days straight. About 90 paramedics from New York State altogether will help out in New York City. And local National Guardsmen and women prepare for action. They did so last night at the Armory on Culver Road. Governor Pataki has asked for 3,000 troops to be in New York City today to be part of the rescue and cleanup effort. At this time, we're not yet sure how many local soldiers are part of this call-out.
Local state troopers are helping out rescue efforts in New York State. State police tell us 53 officers from Troop E in our region left this morning. Rochester's fire chief is shocked and saddened by the terrorist devastation, as we all are, as are many local firefighters. Hundreds of city firefighters are ready to help out if needed. Deborah Bogsty spoke with some of them.
For many local firefighters, there are no words to describe the mounting death toll. As many as 300 of their New York City brothers are feared dead, along with thousands of others.
When you have that number missing of your emergency services workers, it's going to take us a long time to recover from this. So our hearts go out to their families and loved ones.
I think when I first saw it yesterday, I think it just created I would say a pit in my stomach. Just stunned.
Lieutenant Murray is one of more than 200 Rochester firefighters ready and willing to help out in New York if needed. One Rochester firefighter is already there helping out.
It's something that we're trained to do. It's something that hopefully you hope that you will never need to use the training in the capacity of something like this. But it comes with the job.
Deputy Chief Robert Waters fielded many of the calls from those wanting to get on the list of potential volunteers. Right now, they're all waiting to be called out.
Knew that everybody would volunteer to go. It's just the way that most of the firefighters feel. They want to do something. They feel that, they want to go down and do whatever they can.
They're hoping to help save lives so the death toll won't climb as high as many fear.
Our prayers and condolences go out to all of the victims' families.
Deborah Bogsty, News 10 NBC.
Like many departments all around the country, the RFD has received several federal grants for equipment upgrades and anti-terrorist training.
From police to firefighters to civilians, hundreds of Rochesterians are helping out in the rescue and recovery at this point in New York City. A local company, the New York Police Supply in Irondequoit, is coordinating some of the relief effort. The company has received hundreds of blankets, pillows, and cots. Wegmans donated a truck to ship all of the supplies to New York City. The Rochester Red Cross is asking people not to come out today. Red Cross is filled to capacity, and there is still a need for type O negative blood, but only with proof. Type O negative. That is the universal blood type. If you want to donate, you can call the Red Cross number. There it is, 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. Later in the broadcast, Kristen Salome will tell us how the Salvation Army is helping out as well.
Residents in New York City continue to search for loved ones today. Thousands are missing after the collapse of 3 buildings at the World Trade Center. Candace Gibson has more from New York.
Person is alive.
Some hopeful moments amidst the rubble. At least 8 people are found alive, according to the mayor who toured the devastated site.
We're doing searches. We have made some recovery of victims, recovery of remains.
There are several thousand others who remain missing. It's a race against time.
We're still hopeful that we're going to be able to extricate more people.
The crews, police, fire, paramedics, exhausted by the round-the-clock effort to find the victims.
You don't feel tired. I feel numb right now. It's such a surreal scene.
The pain especially hard for New York firemen who lost nearly 300 of their own.
Looks like apocalypse now. I mean, I was in Vietnam as a Marine, and I have never in my life seen anything even remotely close to what I saw there.
Still under a state of emergency, the police and military moved in to lock down the city. Candace Gibson, NBC News, New York.
Now, we have just been handed some breaking news. In addition to the towers that have fallen in New York City, the remaining portion of the South World Trade Center has collapsed. In addition to that, CNN is also reporting that a 5th building in Manhattan, downtown New York City, has also partially collapsed. We will have details on that for you as we get them.
Shelley Ribando is in Manhattan tonight. We will try to go to Shelley in just a few moments. Right now, let's talk about air travel. The Rochester International Airport remains closed tonight, as are virtually all airports nationwide. The FAA has come out with new, tougher security requirements for all airlines. Ray Lovato is standing by live at the Rochester International Airport with the latest. Ray?
Okay, I'm just coming back from talking to Terry Slaybaugh, the administrator who just popped his head out here. No decision yet on whether or not to reopen the airport. Nothing moved here today. The plane sat on the tarmac, and sheriff's deputies continue to patrol the grounds. The sheriff brought in drug-sniffing dogs and made a sweep of the airport today. They also searched planes that have been parked here over the last 24 hours. One of them from Boston may take off later tonight back to Boston, I'm just told. Now, the FAA is mandating new security measures that will almost certainly mean added delays for the flying public. Slaybaugh says there will no longer be any curbside check-in, and only ticketed passengers will be allowed through security checkpoints to the gates.
There will be additional screening that will take place. Probably all passengers will be screened at least twice. At least right now, that's what's being proposed before they can board an aircraft.
We're going to give you a picture here. One of those 2 United jets there, we're not sure which one, is the one that was rerouted here from Boston yesterday. And we're told, Gabe, probably will be up in the air tonight back to Boston. Ray Lovato reporting live from the airport.
Any of those passengers who were diverted here and were forced to land with their planes yesterday, are any of them hanging around the airport for any particular reason? It looks like obviously an empty place at this point.
I can tell you that nobody is hanging around the airport except for sheriff's deputies, officials, and reporters and photographers and live technicians.
And no one's allowed in there.
This place is empty. Yeah. It's barricaded off. If you tried to get in here, you wouldn't be able to because there are checkpoints with sheriff's deputies.
All right, Ray Lovato reporting live. Thank you.
Well, thousands of workers and volunteers searched through what used to be the Twin Towers in New York for victims and survivors. They have been doing that all day. Our Shelley Ribando spent the day in Manhattan observing the rescue efforts. She joins us now live from New York City with the very latest down there. Shelley?
Brian, I'm here 22nd Street, Lower Manhattan, where we're a little distance away from the World Trade Center. Right around me, the air seems fairly clear and clean, but way down near the World Trade Center where we were earlier, the scene was far different. The good news today is that rescue crews have actually rescued 8 people from the rubble, and they've taken them to area hospitals. Mayor Giuliani spent some of the day touring through the rubble and going through it with firefighters and rescue crews. Some of the officials we spoke to were recounting some of their experiences. They said that they could hear people yelling and screaming through the rubble, and they were trying to rescue them. So it's some pretty tough stories to hear. In fact, firemen and rescue crews, they're sharing their stories. But interestingly enough, Mayor Rudy Giuliani said that this will only make the city much stronger.
I was there for about 15 minutes. There were a couple of explosions. It became dangerous. We grabbed one person. We commandeered an ambulance and just hightailed it out of there.
We're going to rebuild. We're not only going to rebuild, we're going to come out of this stronger than we were before.
And Brian, we are a little distance away from the World Trade Center, but we are hearing around 5 o'clock the south tower of the World Trade Center did collapse, and we'll continue to bring the latest live from New York City. Reporting from Manhattan, Shelley Rabando, News 10, NBC.
Okay, Shelley, thank you very much for that live report. Well, many Rochesterians are wondering how they can contribute to relief efforts going on in New York City at this time. Kristen Salome joins us live at the Salvation Army with one suggestion. Kristen?
Well, Brian, the suggestion is donate money. That's always the best way, the Salvation Army says, to lend a helping hand. The number to call is on your screen. One major need that they're trying to fill right now is the need for bottled water. They're also getting this truck right here ready to go to New York City at a moment's notice. They were loading this truck up earlier today. About 30 of these Salvation Army trucks are already in Lower Manhattan. A local crew is getting ready to go down and relieve one of the crews as soon as needed. That could be any day now. Through these trucks, they provide food, drink, and other services for the rescue workers there. The local chapter also has a crew of grief counselors ready to go down and work with the families of victims and rescue workers.
I mean, there's a lot of different people working here that just aren't prepared for it. I'm not sure anybody could actually be prepared for what they have to do, but just listening to people's stories of what they've seen and helping them talk through the tragedy is really what we do.
Now, in just the last half hour since our 5 o'clock broadcast, there have been a number of calls here to the Salvation Army of people wanting to donate money. One very generous person promised $1,000 towards relief efforts. It really makes you feel good, and we all can feel good and help out by calling the number that's at the bottom of your screen, 987-9500. The money will be put to good use. Reporting live at the Salvation Army, Kristen Salome, News 10, NBC.
Kristen, thank you. As you can imagine, investigators are on the scene of all of these terrorist attacks, including the one in Washington. The FBI is collecting evidence in its search for those responsible for the attacks. At the Pentagon, it is back to business as usual, but many workers are back on the job, but nothing is back to normal for them. Beverly Kirk has more.
Fire and rescue crews contain the fires at the Pentagon, and efforts are made to shore up the heavily damaged area where a hijacked jetliner plowed into the headquarters of America's military. Workers here return to their jobs as bodies of the victims are removed. The Defense Department now says around 100 military personnel and civilians were killed in the Pentagon, and officials say they're not expecting to find any more survivors. At the White House, President Bush meets with his national security team early this morning.
The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
Airports around the country remained closed this morning, but transportation officials hope to resume flights this afternoon. The Justice Department says the FBI has already received some 700 leads regarding the terror campaign and is investigating leads in Florida concerning a possible connection to the World Trade Center attack. Heavily armed FBI personnel and other local authorities stormed a Boston hotel today and searched a room believed to be connected to someone on one of the hijacked flights. The FBI says no arrests have been made.
And NBC News has learned exclusive information that the plane that hit the Pentagon yesterday was actually intended for the White House. Also, there's information from the nation's capital that Air Force One was among the targets as well. The nation's capital remains on high alert at this point. 10 NBC's Brett Davidson is there with the very latest.
Good evening from Washington, D.C. Here on Capitol Hill, congressional members got back to work today, passing resolutions condemning yesterday's hideous acts of terror. Republicans and Democrats showed signs of unity, getting behind the president, who promised to bring those responsible to justice. Now, I spoke with U.S. Senators Hillary Clinton and Charles Schumer of New York, as well as other members of our congressional delegation, who tell me strong retaliation is in order once the U.S. determines who attacked our nation.
And the United States government not only has to retaliate specifically against those who carried out this attack, but make it very clear to anyone who supports terrorism that there will be consequences.
And if we find if Afghanistan, for example, has been hiding Osama bin Laden, I think that they're going to be extracted a price.
This, in my opinion, calls for retaliation of our enemy. I think we can stand to do no less. I think the president was clear on it. I think there's bipartisan support to support the president.
Here in Washington, D.C., as rescue and recovery efforts continue not far from here over at the Pentagon, people who live and work in this city try to get back to some sense of normalcy, although many acknowledge things will never be the same. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Brett Davidson, News 10 NBC.
Now, bringing you Western New York's most advanced forecasting technology, here's meteorologist Kevin Williams in the 10 NBC Weather Lab.
And a good afternoon. It was a bright, sunny, warm day here. I hate to use the word pleasant. It wasn't a very pleasant day across our country today, but the weather certainly was something special, and probably not going to be this warm and this sunny together for quite some time. We'll talk about that. We're looking now live at the 10 NBC Weather Lab Triple Doppler. If you have plans this evening, you're fine. Again, the evening weather will be very easy to take. Then some changes are coming our way, but enjoy these numbers. 81 degrees presently live downtown. I don't believe we'll be seeing that kind of number for many days. Let's set the stage for you, shall we? In the weather headlines, the best possible news is the good weather for the rescue efforts in New York City and Washington will continue for tomorrow at least. Big chilly air mass coming here, though, in a couple, make that 24 to 36 hours. And yes, even a little frost is a possibility in our southern valleys, south of 5 and 20, come early Saturday morning. Well, here comes the chill. Look at the temperatures across northern Canada, well down the 30s. I'm going to put this map into motion, keeping an idea that the reds and oranges represent the warm air masses, the higher temperatures. Now, this is over the next 36 hours, ending with Friday afternoon. Notice how the darker shades begin to take hold in time as we put this into motion. And again, this is the coolest air since last May. That'll be flooding the region. High temperatures here suspected to be only in the 50s to near 60 on Friday, despite some sunshine. Right now, though, at the airport, it's warm, 80 degrees with plenty of sunshine. The humidity way down at 35%. The breeze coming at us slightly out of the southwest. Northeast temperatures, again, plenty warm, but you can see from 81 in Detroit to 67 Alpena. Yeah, there is a front there, and that front shows up on our northeast satellite radar composite. Here it is right there with some showers expected from it as it moves through during the day tomorrow. By the way, this is the edge of Hurricane Erin. And imagine how history might have played out differently had Hurricane Erin struck the northeast yesterday. That was a very small possibility, but of course it did not. The weather just perfect. Well, there's the front we're watching. It's coming into town tomorrow. There it is graphically for you. Ahead of it, mild breezes, a couple of showers, maybe a clap of thunder to the south tomorrow morning as that front goes on by. And a very chilly air moves in as we move on into Friday afternoon and Friday night. As the winds subside, temperatures could get low enough to support a light frost in the southern valleys, but again, high pressure means a weekend that will be sun-filled. So our forecast, if you're heading out and about through the rest of the afternoon into the evening hours, fair skies and warm. Later tonight, the clouds sticking up, the low temperature not too low at 62. Tomorrow, well, we're calling for a mostly cloudy day, some showers around, maybe a clap of thunder well south and east. Then the afternoon turns brisk and cooler. Temperatures fall from an early high of 71. There is a chance of some water spouts on Lake Ontario tomorrow night and on Friday. The 5-day forecast Friday, brisk winds and chilly clouds, some sun, 58. Weekend itself looks bright, could start frosty again way south, but in the low to mid 60s, spelling a pleasant autumn weekend with highs in the low to mid 60s. So something to look forward to if you are a fan of fall.
As you mentioned, nice to see that hurricane staying well away from the whole northeast.
Although, you know, and there's another threat next week, we believe. But, you know, imagine how history might have played out differently had a hurricane struck New York City yesterday, which was a small chance, which could have, you know, closed airports, changed travel plans. It's
and you know what? When you think about it, beautiful skies are there to be enjoyed, but how dreadfully were they spoiled yesterday? I mean,
the worst.
So things like nice weather all of a sudden don't mean much.
Not much at all.
Right.
Hundreds are sending their thoughts and expressions of sorrow and support through our website. We want to share some of their emails with you. The Ontario Metis Aboriginal Association writes, "We would like to send our deepest regards and prayers for the family members and loved ones involved in the tragedy." Amanda simply writes, "Even being a 14-year-old child, I think that this is a tragic event that never should have happened."
Charles writes, "While this day is full of tragedy, it is also proof of the American spirit. The outpouring of love and support for the victims is truly inspiring. Every day, people become true heroes, putting their lives on the line in order to help strangers. We will survive. We will, as we have in the past, overcome and move forward. We are one nation under God." If you'd like to share your thoughts, just log on to our website at 10nbc.com.
More evidence has surfaced today regarding Osama bin Laden in connection with yesterday's attacks. The known terrorist is believed to be hiding in Afghanistan. NBC's Steve Swicegood has more.
The exodus is on from Afghanistan. The United Nations has ordered aid workers to leave immediately. Germany and other countries are telling their people to get out as well.
Oh, I'm sorry, we have to go now.
Intelligence experts say Osama bin Laden, the head of a worldwide terrorism network, is connected to the attack on the United States. Bin Laden has been hiding in Afghanistan, where he runs a terrorist training school. He is a follower of the ruling Taliban in Afghanistan. But now the Taliban, fearing a massive reprisal from the United States, is trying to distance itself from the terrorist. The Taliban's foreign minister condemned the attack on America today, but Afghanistan's opposition leaders say the Taliban has to accept some blame.
We strongly believe that the Taliban, Osama bin Laden, and their other associates in the region, it is anticipated that they will be involved in the yesterday accidents in Washington, in New York.
The Taliban, a religious militia that promotes a harsh brand of Islam, controls about 95% of Afghanistan. President Bush issued a warning that the United States would consider anyone who harbors a terrorist just as responsible as the terrorists themselves. And considering how the Taliban has done nothing to discourage bin Laden's acts in the past, most believe Afghanistan is a large target that will soon be hit, and that it's wise to get out of the way. Steve Swicegood, NBC News.
The city of Rochester closed 2 parking garages today. Workers turned away motorists as they came in to work this morning as commuters. Officials also closed the Crossroads parking garage behind the Federal Building and the Crown Plaza Hotel. The county's Civic Center garage was only open to key card carriers.
The cleanup efforts have closed Wall Street for a second straight day. The city's financial district struggled to recover today from yesterday's attack. The stock exchange will decide later today when trading will resume. Officials think the markets could open as soon as Thursday. Officials now say the market is not expected to open until Friday, we're just told. Stock markets around the world reacted sharply to yesterday's attacks. The Nikkei index in Japan continues to reach record lows. Many Japanese businesses delayed or stopped trading for the day. About 31 Japanese companies, including many banks, had offices in the World Trade Center. OPEC says it's committed to keeping the oil flowing despite the tragedy. Gas stations all around the country jacked up prices yesterday amid fears that supplies might be cut off. In the Mideast, in the Middle Eastern part of our country, gas prices got up to $4 to $5 a gallon. OPEC says it's committed to market stability and ensuring enough gasoline is available worldwide. 4 trainees from the Rochester office of Morgan Stanley were visiting the Trade Center yesterday. A local branch member says the workers are all in their 20s and were able to vacate the buildings. Meanwhile, a Xerox spokesperson says the document company has located a majority of its workers that were based in New York City. Workers there continue using phone trees to locate those missing. 7 local employees of Harris Beach Wilcox are still missing. Rochester's second biggest law firm says all but 7 of its 113 employees there are safe. Officials say the employees cleared out after the first tower was hit. The workers are from Rochester and were in New York on assignment.
Students and faculty at McQuaid High School are praying and hoping for the best tonight. A former student and the father of a former student were at the World Trade Center yesterday morning when it was attacked. Gary Liberatore joins us live from Brighton with more. Gary?
Gabe, it's always a place for prayer here at the McQuaid Jesuit High School, but today, 2 families of the 2 men recently affiliated here are at the forefront of everyone's mind. Family and friends gather at the home of Thomas Duffy in Pittsford.
We're just kind of waiting and hoping, praying for the best at this point.
Jason Duffy tells us his father left yesterday morning for a 9 o'clock meeting on the 99th floor of the World Trade Center North Tower.
We just know that my father was in the World Trade Center on the 99th floor, first building, and really that's all we know at this point. He was there for a meeting at 9 o'clock. So just had little bits and pieces of information coming in from people he's worked with.
Jason's younger brother just graduated from McQuaid.
And for all of us here in Rochester who somehow are waiting for news, anticipating news, and hoping for the best news.
At McQuaid High School, Father Fred Betty holds a prayer session for his students. A picture of Brandon Buchanan is on the front wall and on his door. Brandon works on the 104th floor of World Trade Center North.
So I think in every class there's been prayer. In the morning there's been prayer. We had a prayer service yesterday, and that's what keeps us strong as a school, and it goes beyond the building to all the families that we're connected with.
When you go on campus...
Gerald Farrell was Brandon's guidance counselor for 4 years.
I remember him quite well from his days here at McQuaid, and he's a very outgoing, gregarious young guy.
And now everyone here is praying for the two people connected so closely with McQuaid. Praying that somehow these two men will be found alive amongst all that rubble and return home to their families. Reporting live from Brighton, Gary Liberatore, News 10, NBC.
Rich Funky joins us now with sports. I guess sports world, economic world, everything has been affected by this tragedy.
In a profound way. Tom Coughlin is the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. His son was at the World Trade Center yesterday. He was able to get out before the collapse, and he's okay. Certainly, games are way down on the priority list right now, but here's an update on what decisions have been made. Major League Baseball has decided to cancel games tonight and tomorrow. Minor league playoff games have been canceled. The NYP League declared Brooklyn and Williamsport co-champions. The Syracuse football game against East Carolina, set for Saturday, has been postponed and rescheduled for Saturday, September 29th. In fact, all Big East teams are rescheduling this weekend's football games. Here at home, Brockport will play its game against Montclair State this weekend. At Brockport, officials at Montclair, which is just outside Manhattan, called and asked that the game be played as scheduled. As for the National Football League, no decision yet on whether games will be played, although the Jets, who are scheduled to play in Oakland, have expressed concern about flying. The Browns say that they will go to Pittsburgh by bus if that game, in fact, goes on. In Buffalo, the Bills continue to prepare to face the Miami Dolphins Sunday. They are scheduled to leave Saturday afternoon, but the majority of players told Rick Hager this afternoon that they believe the game should be canceled.
I'd rather come back and play a 14-game season and just really, because this is a trying time for everybody, not just the professional athletes. It's not about us right now. It's not about professional sports.
If the NFL cancels, the entire schedule, including the Super Bowl, would have to be pushed back because there is no extra week between the conference championships and the Super Bowl this year. The PGA has decided to cancel this weekend's American Express World Championship in St. Louis, and NASCAR postponed qualifying for the New Hampshire 300 Friday, but the race is going to go on Sunday. Section 5 football, that schedule will go on as scheduled this weekend, Friday and Saturday games. In fact, high school action was postponed yesterday. They did, in fact, return to the playing fields this afternoon. The Rhinos playoff game, Gabe, was originally scheduled for the 22nd. Their first playoff game, that's been pushed back because the first round of the A-League playoff games have been postponed.
Of course, transportation is a problem, and they can't get from one city to another, obviously, and so everything has been disrupted.
Yep.
Rich, thanks a lot. The world reacted to these terrorist acts in the U.S. with shock and dismay. More than 1,000 extra police have been deployed to keep an eye out for suspicious activity. Officials are also closely checking incoming flights. People wondered how could the attacks have happened and if they could happen in Britain as an instance. German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder described yesterday's attacks as a declaration of war. Schroeder said the attacks were not only on America, but the deepest values of society. He then offered Germany's help in fighting the terrorists. At the same time, Germany is increasing security at airports and other public areas across the country. Israelis mourn the victims of the attacks as they get ready for the Jewish New Year. Hundreds of children spent the day creating a giant sympathy card for the U.S. Hundreds more have answered the call for blood donations, lining up at centers throughout Israel. Local doctors and nurses are ready to help victims in New York City if needed. Medical reporter Robin DeWin joins us now live from the newsroom with more on their effort. Robin?
Well, Gabe, more than 7,000 doctors and nurses from across the state have volunteered to help aid victims after yesterday's devastating attack in New York City. Dr. Richard Gangemi is heading up a team of doctors, nurses, and physician assistants from Rochester General Hospital. Now, a total of 65 medical personnel from our area are on standby. 4 people from the Monroe County Health Department are already in New York City to help with autopsies. It's still unclear if there will be a need for all of the volunteers. The initial fear was that the disaster area was going to have too many casualties to handle.
What may happen is that if the physicians in New York City, if they become fatigued or tired and help is needed, I would imagine that they would go to the list that was generated out of the hotline from the Healthcare Association of New York State.
Now, local hospitals yesterday were in a disaster mode. They canceled all elective surgeries and they made bed space available if necessary if people were coming from New York City with non-emergency kind of injuries, but that wasn't necessary. But again, seeing the pictures on television inspired a lot of doctors and nurses to want to do something and to volunteer. Reporting live from the newsroom, medical reporter Robin DeWind, News 10 NBC.
All right, Robin, thank you very much. If you are just joining us, we want to recap on how the terrorist attacks are affecting us here at home today.
First, we've just learned that the final portion of the South Tower at the World Trade Center has collapsed. There were no reports of injuries in this particular part of the disaster, but we are now also told that another building, which would make it building number 6, I guess, at this point.
5 or 6, I'm not sure.
But at least another building is now in danger of collapsing any moment. And we also know that at least 9 people with ties to Rochester are still missing. They all work inside the World Trade Center towers. We will have more coming up in a live report.
The Rochester International Airport remains closed until further notice. The Federal Aviation Administration is instituting new security requirements. So when it does reopen, it could cause added delays for people flying in and out of Rochester.
Local people are waiting and wanting to do whatever they can to help, and many are donating blood. The Red Cross has new information on what you should do at this point. Some local people are still waiting for word tonight about their loved ones who are missing in these attacks at the World Trade Center. 2 men have ties to McQuaid High School. Gary Liberatore joins us live from McQuaid with more on that. Gary?
Gabe, one man is a 1995 graduate of the school here, the other a father of a 1998 graduate. Definitely a day of special prayer here at the school.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
Prayers are something normally spoken at McQuaid High School. Today, though, they just sound a little different.
There's a connectedness. People know people here at McQuaid who have been directly involved in the tragedy.
Like 1995 graduate Brandon Buchanan. Brandon works on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center North Tower and is considered missing.
So I think in every class there's been prayer.
It's a Division I school.
The popular student is on the minds of many staff members. Some, like guidance counselor Gerald Farrell, remember him well.
But probably most particularly, I remember his smile and his good-natured approach to life.
The McQuaid ties to the terrorist acts don't stop with students. A father of a former student is still missing. He works here at a company called Marsh USA in Linden Oaks in Penfield. His name is Thomas Duffy, and at his Pittsford home today, family and friends are saying prayers of their own.
We're just kind of waiting and hoping, praying for the best at this point.
Thomas Duffy left for New York yesterday morning. His family hasn't heard from him since.
We just know that my father was in the World Trade Center on the 99th floor, first building, and really that's all we know at this point. He was there for a meeting at 9 o'clock. So just had little bits and pieces of information coming in from people he's worked with.
So tonight, 2 local families cling to prayers. Prayers they'll see their loved ones be one of those miracles who make it out of this rubble alive. And of course, these are just 2 of the thousands of families awaiting word from the rescue effort going on down in New York City. Reporting live from Brighton, Gary Liberatore, News 10, NBC.
All right, Gary, thank you very much. And the law firm of Harris, Beach and Wilcox says that 7 of its employees are still missing. Rochester's second largest law firm had an office on the 85th floor of the South Tower. 113 people from Harris Beach work in that tower. Again, 7 of those 113 employees are still missing. Xerox says that it had a business services division in the World Trade Center. A Xerox spokesperson says that they've located a majority of their employees, but some are still missing. Xerox would not give us a specific number.
There has been an outpouring of support from Rochester residents. Today, the Red Cross had to turn people away at local blood centers. Medical reporter Robin DeWin joins us live in the newsroom with more on what you need to know before you donate blood. Robin?
Well, Brian, there's really been an amazing response from the Rochester community. People are still encouraged to donate blood despite the fact that many were turned away today. Yesterday, the Red Cross collected 3,000 units of blood. That's a 3-day supply. By the end of today, by tonight, they expect to have a full week's supply. If you are O negative and have proof, you can donate tonight, but otherwise the Red Cross is asking that you donate tomorrow or later in the week since they are filled to capacity tonight.
But it's important to remember that this is why we talk about having a supply on hand. This is why we talk about a strategic reserve, is because incidents like this cannot be predicted, and that's why steady donations are needed every day.
Now, to find out about a donation site near you, you should call 1-800-GIVE-LIFE. That will give you donation sites in your area. Local doctors and nurses are volunteering if needed. The Healthcare Association of New York State has already received word from more than 7,000 doctors and nurses across the state who are willing to help people in New York City. Dr. Richard Gangemi at Rochester General Hospital is organizing a team of 45 that's on standby. A total of 65 local people are prepared to offer their services here. 4 people from the county health department are already in New York City helping to perform autopsies.
The initial fear was that the disaster area was going to have so many casualties that they wouldn't be able to handle them.
Now, all local hospitals yesterday were prepared to take non-critical patients from New York City, but again, that wasn't needed. Orthopedic and plastic surgeons as well as burn specialists will likely be needed, but again, they really haven't had time to assess the damage, so they don't know which volunteers they will need. Reporting live from the newsroom, medical reporter Robin DeWin, News 10 NBC.
The Federal Aviation Administration has grounded all flights in the United States for a second day. Local officials met this afternoon about the situation at our local airport. Let's go live now to Ray Lovato at the airport with the very latest. Ray?
Well, Brian, I spoke to Airport Administrator Terry Slaybaugh not long ago, and this is the very latest. He says this airport probably will not be able to open first thing tomorrow morning, if tomorrow at all. Now, the one thing that struck me and others here today was how quiet it was. You could actually hear the noise from the nearby 390 expressway when you would normally all hear the noise from the jet engines and the turboprops. We were here also when sheriff's deputies brought in their dogs, their drug-sniffing dogs. Dogs were also brought in from the city police department and the towns of Irondequoit and Ogden. They made a sweep of the terminal and the planes on the tarmac. And when the airport does reopen, be prepared for some changes. There will be more security, more screening of passengers, and also be prepared to spend significantly longer time in lines at this airport and especially at the larger airports.
Well, I just think Rochesterians got used to being in their kitchen 1 minute drinking coffee and, you know, a half hour later sitting in their airplane getting ready to go to their destination. And I think that with these new requirements, that's going to become a thing of the past.
If you have been here before and sitting in your car in front of the terminal waiting for a passenger, well, those days are over. Parked vehicles will no longer be allowed, and unoccupied vehicles, the sheriff says, will be removed immediately. And of course, as we said at the beginning of this, the airport probably is not ready to open tomorrow morning first thing, and we'll have updates. The county promises them through the evening if they're warranted. Reporting live from the airport, Ray Lovato, News 10 NBC.
Ray, thank you very much. We talked about hospitals and the Red Cross. The Salvation Army is another local agency helping with rescue efforts in New York City. Kristen Salome joins us live now at the local chapter with more. Kristen?
Well, Gabe, I'm inside the local chapter's canteen truck, which, as you can see, is set up to provide drinks and full meals to rescue workers who are working downstate near the catastrophe. They were loading it up, getting it ready to go earlier today with bottled spring water. Spring Waters Inc. out of Naples and KB Transport are 2 local companies that are pitching in to help the Salvation Army send 600 cases to New York City tonight. Individuals have been pitching in as well. The donations have been pouring in here since we started broadcasting the Salvation Army's number at 5 o'clock.
This is the same company too, right?
A terrible tragedy has happened, but this is a great country. We have great people who want to help, and it's beautiful to see people wanting to help their neighbors, people that they don't even know, wanting to rally around, and we need that kind of support in this terrible time.
And they are getting that kind of support. In just the last hour, they've received $2,100 in donations, plus promises for about $1,000 more. And it's not too late for you to donate as well. Just call the number on your screen, 987-9500, to do your part. It certainly will be appreciated here at the Salvation Army. Reporting live from the Salvation Army's canteen truck, Kristen Salome, News 10, NBC.
All right, Kristen, of course, many people have been donating, and very generously as well. Many helping with the relief effort without leaving town. Some much-needed bedding was donated for search and rescue workers downstate. Lynette Adams has more on that.
He asked for a little help.
We told Wegmans, who's providing the tractor trailer for us, that, well, maybe we'll get a half a truck if we're lucky. I just called Wegmans and asked for a second tractor trailer, which they were very happy to provide.
Mike Cohn is one of the owners of New York Police Supply. When Cohn asked the community to donate bedding to send to rescue workers in New York City, he never anticipated this. So many people came out, Irondequoit police had to help with traffic. The help started yesterday when the store sent 140,000 square feet of police line tape. The New York City Police Department called back this morning asking for help with bedding.
They've got firemen and police between shifts sleeping on the streets, sleeping on the floors because they're not going home. They're staying there, and most of them are working double shifts and then taking a couple hours to nap.
Those police include 58 state troopers from our area. Wegmans donated water and snacks. Food came from Tops and Walmart. Raymore and Flanagan donated brand new cots. People just want to help.
It's breaking my heart that there's evil in this world, and I want to see justice done and do anything that I possibly can.
I was a volunteer fireman for 20 years, and I've been through a lot of things through my life, and I think they need the help.
Lynette Adams, News 10 NBC.
And again, that store, New York State Police Supply, no longer needs blankets or other supplies.
Rochester firefighters are ready to head to New York City to help out if needed. More than 200 voluntarily put their names on a standby list. Hundreds of New York City firefighters are missing and feared dead in the Trade Center collapse tonight. Right now, local crews are waiting to be called out and remain hopeful that survivors will be found in time.
Especially, we're saddened by the number of firefighters who may have lost their life in New York, and our prayers and condolences go out to all of the victims, families and loved ones yesterday.
Hopefully maybe they can find a bunch of people and get to them in time and be able to rescue some of these people that may be entrapped in this debris.
One Rochester firefighter is already at the World Trade Center helping in the search for survivors. And of course, these attacks are on the minds of everyone today. Local high school and college students spent the day talking about the national tragedy. Education reporter Elizabeth Shernack joins us now with tonight's Project Education.
Brian, before school even started this morning, students at Webster High School gathered at the flagpole for a prayer vigil. Students were not required to pray, but dozens came out to show their support. For about a half hour, students held each other's hands and bowed their heads in silence. After the vigil, students told us they were shocked by the impact of terrorism, the first major incident these kids have ever had to deal with so close to home. A history and politics professor at Monroe County Community College devoted 2 of his classes today to discussions about terrorism. Henry French teaches American national government and political philosophy. His students asked a lot of questions about terrorist activity, the role of religion in war, and a potential of a military draft.
That they have already asked the question in both of my classes and in the halls and in my office, do you think there's going to be a draft? And I said, yes, I do, because I think this is a war.
I'm a little more worried now because he said, because of his knowledge and his opinion, that the draft could increase and there would have to be sort of more government control to regulate things.
I don't really understand
the security in the airports. I don't understand how 4 planes can be hijacked. I don't even understand how 1 plane can be hijacked.
Most of the students in Professor French's classes say it's important they learn about and understand the route of this tragedy, especially since they are of age to be eligible for a draft. With Project Education, Elizabeth Chernak, News 10 NBC.
Elizabeth, thank you. Rural Metro Ambulance has 3 crews down in New York City, and Shelley Rabando is in Manhattan tonight. We are just told that we have just lost the signal from Shelley, who is about to give us a live report from Manhattan about the traffic and all of the horrific things that she's seeing down there as a reaction to the disaster yesterday. But right now, let's go over to the Weather Lab, the 10 NBC Weather Lab, and Kevin Williams. Kev?
Now, bringing you Western New York's most advanced forecasting technology, here's meteorologist Kevin Williams in the 10 NBC Weather Lab.
Well, Gabe, certainly no one could be faulted for not noticing how beautiful the weather was here today. Bright sun and as warm as it's going to be for a while. The good news, the warmth continues, as does the pleasant weather for the recovery and rescue efforts in New York City and in Washington, D.C. And I begin with a quote I happened to hear from a network commentator earlier that I think is very appropriate. The reason that the eagle is our national symbol is because it is the one bird that can survive the storm. And indeed, we will do just that. Now, we do have some storms out in the Atlantic waters we need to tell you about. This would be Hurricane Erin tracking away from the coast now. This would be borderline Hurricane Felix on the brink right now in the South Atlantic. And we're watching a tropical depression in the west coast of Florida, the eastern Gulf. And this system is interesting because some models track it due west toward Texas. The others, some others bring it right up the eastern seaboard next week. So we'll have to wait and see. It's still percolating out there as a tropical depression. We will keep you advised. These are the numbers in our almanac today. 81 and 51, the split. It was a warm afternoon, but some very, very noticeable changes in the temperature department are right around the corner. But right now, it's just a picture-perfect day weather-wise. 80 degrees, the bright sun, the humidity low at 35%. You know, the drought conditions are intensifying once again. The breeze out of the southwest at 8. And the rainfall deficit is getting rather concerning once again. But around here, we're enjoying sunshine, at least across the area, with temperatures principally in the 80s now, including 80 up in Greece and an 82 down in the Penyan area. The Northeast Satellite Radar Review, first of all, shows the edges of Hurricane Erin. For us, again, the sunshine today, but that front means business. It's got some showers with it. Not worried about any really heavy weather here. A few showers, maybe a rumble of thunder south and east as that front moves through tomorrow morning and midday. Behind it, though, is some very cool air. Here it is graphically for you ahead of the front. High pressure and sunshine boosted temperatures past 80 today, and that was some great news. Here comes the front, though, with a couple of showers tomorrow, perhaps a clap of thunder in the morning, south and east. And then it looks like it may bring some rain to the New York City area Thursday night into Friday, and I don't know how that will play out for the rescue efforts there. And then it's back to sunshine for New York City for the weekend, and high pressure brings plenty of sunshine here this weekend, but it will be very, very cool. So our forecast looks like a fair evening, clouding up later tonight. Mild, the low temperature down to 62 for tomorrow. A couple of in the afternoon, a stiffening north breeze, the early high 71. Then, as the day wears on, temperatures drop through the 60s. Could be in the 50s this time tomorrow, and there's the chance of some water spouts on Lake Ontario later tomorrow, and especially tomorrow night into Friday. Here's the way the 5-day forecast shapes up then. We are anticipating tomorrow to, as I said, feature a few showers, falling temps. Friday, brisk winds and chilly with clouds and some sunshine. Temperatures may have to struggle to get out of the 50s. The weekend itself looks bright but brisk. There is a small chance of some light frost in some of the rural valleys south of 5 and 20 by early Saturday morning. But a warm one today, but a real flavor of fall as we head into the weekend.
Right around the corner. Kevin, thanks.
We understand that we have the signal now from Shelley Rabando, who's live in Manhattan. Shelley?
That's right, Gabe. Actually, just a few minutes ago, we saw 2 rural metro ambulances drive by from Rochester. In fact, right now, Mayor Giuliani and Senator Clinton are holding a press conference, and they're asking for help from around the state, around the country, from around the world, and certainly Rochester is coming to task for that. We also wanted to mention a few things. We have some newspapers, some local newspapers. The Journal News today headlining "A New Day of Infamy." I don't have enough hands today. And the other, the New York Post, "Act of War." So you can obviously get a sentiment of what the local papers are like down here. We also had a chance to speak to a Rochester native whose apartment was just a block or 2 from the World Trade Center. And he had a chance. He said he heard something go off. It sounded like a bomb. He looked out of his window, and what you're probably looking at, his home is is pretty much what he was seeing as well, and he described it today as just like a horror movie. We're going to try to bring you more of what he had to say coming up a little later on. And just to recap as well, the South Tower of the World Trade Center did collapse around 5 o'clock this afternoon. We're continuing to follow that as well. We'll bring you the latest. Reporting live from Manhattan, Shelley Rabando, News 10, NBC.
Shelley, I hope you can hear us okay. I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. First of all, I understand that you drove by the United Nations while it was being evacuated today. Is that true?
Okay, Gabe, I can barely hear you, but I think you're asking about the UN. We, interestingly enough, we were driving right by the UN around, I'd say, 12:30 this afternoon when they did have a bomb threat. We got out, we started talking to officials there. They said that they had evacuated the building and they were sending in a canine unit. We stayed around for a little while, and by the time we left, they said everything was back to normal and there was no longer a bomb threat in the area. But I'll tell you, being around and seeing that, it's different when you're down here, and you can feel what people mean when they sense terror, because you never know. You never know what can happen. So, like I said, we'll keep you up to date, but for now, we'll send it back to you.
All right, and I understand, because you're familiar with the area, because your hometown is across the river in Tuxedo, New York. What was traffic like? What was New York City like today? Oh, we lost Shelley.
We lost Shelley.
All right.
All right, we'll try to get that a little bit later. Well, hope of finding any survivors in the rubble at the Pentagon is fading. Brett Davidson is at the Pentagon, where he spoke with one woman waiting to find out about her husband. Brett, can you describe for us what it's like down there? Okay, obviously, we do not have Brett right now either.
It's one of the things that has been a victim in all this, obviously, is communications. Initially, I mean, one of the World Trade Towers contained some of the most significant communications equipment around
in the world, right?
Cell phones and so forth. So it's tough to talk to anyone, across town, no less downstate. So
no question about it.
The whole world, obviously, the world of sports is affected as well.
The sports world has been affected in a very profound way, Gabe. While the NFL wrestles with whether to play football games this weekend, Jacksonville Jaguars coach Tom Coughlin, a native of Waterloo, is giving thanks. His son was in the World Trade Center when the first plane struck yesterday. He was not injured, however. Also, let's talk about the fact that the NFL will make a decision tomorrow. We're going to have a report from Rick Hager on what's going on with the Buffalo Bills in just a couple of moments. But we can tell you that Major League Baseball has called off 2 more days of games following yesterday's attacks in New York and in Washington. Games are not scheduled to resume now until Friday, other than for baseball work stoppages, player strikes and so forth. Baseball hasn't been stopped on consecutive days since 1918, when the season was cut short by World War I. Syracuse football will be postponed this weekend. The Orangemen are set to host East Carolina. That game on Saturday has been postponed and rescheduled now for Saturday, September 29th. In fact, all of the Big East teams are rescheduling this weekend's games. Here at home, Brockport will play its game against Montclair State this weekend at Brockport. Officials at Montclair, which is just outside Manhattan, called and asked that the game be played as scheduled. As I mentioned, the Buffalo Bills continued preparations to face the Miami Dolphins this weekend. We do not know yet as to whether that game, in fact, will be played. Rick Hager was at practice today.
Rich, this is normally a very important practice and preparation day, but football was clearly not the all-consuming focus for the Bills and head coach Greg Williams. Flags outside the administration building were at half-staff. Inside the media room, attention was centered on President Bush and news coverage. Coach Williams spoke for 20 minutes, but reporters didn't ask a single question about football.
And I understand today's practice is pretty trivial on what occurred.
The Bills did practice for 2.5 hours, not knowing if Sunday's game would be played.
I'd rather come back and play a 14-game season and just really, because this is a trying time for everybody, not just the professional athletes. It's not about us right now. It's not about professional sports.
In Jacksonville, head coach Tom Coughlin was very relieved. His son Tim was in one of the towers, but was able to escape safely. Coughlin spoke to his son by cell phone just as he was leaving the towers.
And he told me that, that he was on the ground, and he was headed for an exit. And I said, well, be very careful. You don't know where you're coming out into. You don't know. He said, Dad, we only have one way to go.
Also, Buffalo Bills defensive end Bryce Fisher is a member of the Air Force Reserves. He says he has not been called and does not expect to be called up at this point. Almost to a man, the Buffalo Bills believe that they should not play football this weekend. Now, the Rhinos' first playoff game has been pushed back a week. The A-League postponed its first-round playoff games, which means the Rhinos' game, originally scheduled for September 22nd, will not be played until September 29th. The World Golf Championship in St. Louis has now been canceled. Originally, they were going to postpone tomorrow and then play 36 holes on Friday. The entire event has been canceled now, and the PGA Senior event also has been canceled. NASCAR qualifying in New Hampshire Friday has been canceled, but the race will be held on Sunday. And Section 5 canceled yesterday's calendar, but high school games resumed today, and high school football will be played on Friday and Saturday.
And they've practiced already this week, I understand. Thanks, Rich.
We are going to try to go now again live to Brett Davidson, who joins us live in Washington, D.C. with the very latest down there. Brett, what can you tell us?
Well, Brian, I can tell you that the rescue and the recovery efforts go on not far from here over at the Pentagon. In the 33 hours since the attack, we have heard countless stories of both sadness and relief. But tonight, the story of a woman who feels neither. As we met up with her, she still awaited news about a loved one. Tracy Rowenhorst waits and watches and prays.
There are prayer chains of family and friends. The Pentagon chaplains have been here with me, and that is really what's keeping me going.
You see, her husband Eddie is an accountant who works in the Pentagon, in the general area that was decimated by a terrorist hijacker yesterday.
I don't know, they just moved there, and I haven't really visited, and I don't really know.
Do you know if that's anywhere near where?
It's very close. I don't know how close, but very.
Her last conversation with her husband came yesterday by phone, shortly before the attacks. The topic, when he'd be coming home. Now she's not sure if he'll be coming home.
I have my name at every hospital and every morgue and every list that they have put out.
And I heard you say that you wouldn't mind getting into that rubble yourself.
If that's what it took, yeah. If it meant saving even just one life.
What she hasn't been told is that Pentagon officials have all but given up hope of finding any survivors. And when she looks out at the smoke and debris and destruction, Tracy says she feels frustration, anger, and fear.
My greatest hope is that he comes out unscathed, maybe a cut, a bruise, something like that. And of course my worst fear is going home and telling my kids he's not coming home.
And we don't know tonight if Tracy has learned anything more about her husband, but our thoughts and our prayers certainly go out to her and her children. If there is any encouraging news today, it's that the loss of life may be considerably lower than the worst projections. The Pentagon says it believes about 100 people died inside the building, far fewer than the 800 estimated yesterday. Reporting live in Washington, D.C., Brett Davidson, News 10 NBC.
Now, Brett, really quickly, I know you got a chance to get obviously very close to the Pentagon. Can you describe for us what it looked like up close?
It was quite interesting, Brian. I can tell you that the images are just absolutely unforgettable. Reminds you of Oklahoma City. The smell of the smoke still lingered. It was still very strong and unavoidable. Just the destruction was just unbelievable, just remarkable.
All right, Brett Davidson reporting live from Washington. Thank you.
As you can imagine, there was no activity on the stock markets today with Wall Street closed, and of course economists are now wondering how the country grinding to a halt as it has will affect stock prices when Wall Street does open up, and of course how all of this might affect our potential for an economic recovery soon. Many of you are sending us your thoughts about this national tragedy on the internet. We want to share some of those thoughts with you now. Becky and Lindsay write, I think that it is terrible that anybody would be so heartless to destroy buildings and to take the lives of thousands. I am young but old enough to understand that what was done was wrong. I was in awe when the TV was turned on at school in my class and 2 buildings smoking heavily. When our teacher explained the best she could about what happened, I think we were all surprised. Mike writes, it's sad to see all those innocent people perish. Our country has suffered one of the largest tragedies in a great while. All of the people in the country need to work together and help out those who are in need. Our prayers go out to all those loved ones and to everyone in this time of need. If you'd like to give us your thoughts, log on to our website, 10nbc.com.
We've just been handed some information that the rest of the World Trade Center's Twin Towers are now gone. There's a live picture of downtown Manhattan. The stump of the south building, the bottom 4 stories, has now collapsed. It was all that remained of the gleaming white buildings that used to stand tall in downtown Manhattan. Police are evacuating rescue workers from the area, and there are, again, no immediate reports of any injuries. I'm sure those areas have been evacuated for quite some time, so hopefully people are far away from...
there was a danger.
From those buildings.
But that was just a shell at this point.
I believe so. Just
original,
part of a wall, just a little bit that left standing at this hour.
Well, what was really astounding is several things as a reaction initially to those buildings coming down. First of all, that they came down, they sort of imploded.
Right,
and
came down on
themselves from the weight.
Yeah.
And you know, and just imagining. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to the 110-story.
Have been up there. It's
and
great.
It is a beautiful, beautiful sight up there.
Yeah.
But being up there, I mean, the awesome. The power you feel being that high and seeing this massive structure under you, and then imagining that, having been there, collapsing like that is just
it's hard to imagine. It's very difficult to imagine.
It's going to take, forget about, I mean, obviously the rescue and the recovery operation is going to go on now for possibly months, but then clearing away the debris is going to take probably a year or more.
Yeah, we're going to go take you back to a live picture again now, so you can kind of see exactly what's going on.
And apparently, possibly one other building is in danger nearby of collapsing at this point?
Correct. And obviously, the buildings you can see well damaged from the fall, the collapse of the towers. Did plenty of damage to the surrounding buildings around where those towers used to stand.
And there are, of course, crews from Rochester, as we mentioned, there helping in the rescue efforts, and thousands of rescuers and people who are familiar with picking up debris from all over the country and all over the world as well, helping in this.
Absolutely. And please be sure to join Tom Brokaw up next for an hour-long edition of the NBC Nightly News from 6:30 to 7:30. He will have the latest on the death toll, as well as more on developments that the hijacked plane that hit the Pentagon was actually headed for the White House. And of course, we would like to hear what you think about these acts of terrorism. Coming up at 7:30, we will have a special broadcast. We invite you to call us and share your thoughts and your comments with us live on the air. The number to call, 325-4444.
And we will share those thoughts at 7:30 with you. That's the latest from News 10 NBC right now. Stay tuned for Tom Brokaw next.
And we will see you right back here at 7:30. Have a good night.
Attack on America. The day after, the smoke begins to clear. A breakthrough. NBC's terrorism task force with new information on who did this and why. The president's press secretary says the White House and Air Force One were missed targets. A day of desperate rescues, profound sadness, and moments of astonishing kindness.
Attack on America. This is a special edition of NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. Tonight, another major section of New York City's World Trade Center is in danger of collapsing as the United States is marshaling forces for a war against terrorism. President Bush tonight visiting the Pentagon. At the same time, the president and his advisors are working urgently to line up an international political alliance. They're also sending a very stern message to Afghanistan. They're organizing military options, and most important, they're trying to determine who was responsible, find them, and punish them. Here in New York, the sad task of the search for the survivors and the victims goes on and on. You're looking live at the scene tonight. This is ground zero, what's left of the mighty twin towers of the World Trade Center, and another section may collapse. It's now a heavy construction zone. More than 100 pieces of major construction equipment on the scene, mostly removing large pieces of debris so the rescuers can pick through the rubble hand by hand. Amid the devastation, a few small miracles. 7 people have been pulled out alive so far. Rescue attempts continuing, still no guess on the death toll, but remember, it's estimated that between 10 and 20,000 people were in the building when those twin towers came down. A temporary morgue has been set up in what was once a Brooks Brothers store. It is taking in remains, but grim news, mostly body parts at this point. The Commander-in-Chief has gone across the Potomac tonight to the Pentagon, where he is greeting the military personnel who have been working around the clock at the Pentagon, which was another target in this terrorist war. The death toll there now has been revised. Originally, Arlington County fire officials said it could be as many as 800. Today, Defense Secretary Don Rumsfeld said it will be lower than that, although he could not give us a specific number. We do believe, however, that it's more in the range of 100 to 150 than the 800 number. That's a small piece of good news, but the loss of more than 100 American military personnel, too great, obviously, as well. We're going to begin tonight with the fast-moving developments on who did this. We have organized an NBC News journalistic terrorism task force. And we have extensive new information tonight. We'll begin with NBC's Justice Department correspondent, Pete Williams, with the latest for us. Pete?
Good evening, Tom. With the smoke still clearing from the terrorist targets in New York and Washington, Justice Department officials tonight say they have what they call a tremendous number of leads from a worldwide investigation that's now moving surprisingly quickly, partly because of solid detective work and partly because of lucky breaks. Federal agents respond immediately. More than 4,000 FBI special agents and 3,000 support staff already on the case, sweeping the nation for evidence from fragments at the scene of the attacks to any documentary proof of what the suspected terrorists were up to. Between 3 and 6 per plane, authorities now say.
The United States Attorney's Office's terrorism units and the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Forces are obtaining the passenger manifests, rental car receipts, telephone logs, videotape from parking garages, and pay telephone videotape records at all scenes for review and appropriate follow-up interviews.
Scrutiny of those passenger lists leads the FBI to this flight school in Florida, where officials say they believe at least 2 of the terrorists received pilot training during the past year. A man who worked at the flight school says he allowed both of them, who described themselves as Germans, to briefly live with him and his wife.
While they were here, I know that they had used this address initially, and I know that because I would get insurance renewals for them addressed to them at this address for that call.
In Boston, agents swarm area hotels where registration records match suspicious names from passenger lists of the hijacked planes, detaining at least 3 people for further questioning, holding them now on immigration charges. And in a hugely helpful break, the FBI impounds a car found at the airport after a witness says it was driven by 2 Arabic men. In it, authorities say they discover airplane technical documents. Federal agents also stop an Amtrak train in Rhode Island today, part of a frantic nationwide effort, the FBI says, to make certain no other conspirators remain at large where they could mount further attacks.
Our first effort is to identify any associates in the United States who might be related to the hijackers and to remove those associates, investigate, and arrest, given the evidence, those individuals, and to remove any threat to the air system in the future.
Among other searches today, agents descend upon this mailbox rental office in New Jersey, where some of the suspected terrorists may have received their mail. And tonight, law enforcement officials tell NBC News they're preparing still more search warrants based on evidence churned up by this rapidly expanding investigation. One official tonight says expect to see even more federal raids in the next few days, Tom.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Pete Williams tonight. There was a great deal of activity today. Federal law enforcement officials were swarming all over the city of Boston It was Logan Airport, obviously, that was the origin of two of the flights that were used in the hijacking, the two flights that crashed into the World Trade Center. One of our investigative reporters, Dateline's Chris Hansen, is in Boston tonight. There were reports of arrests earlier today, but no arrest in Boston, I gather, at the end of the day.
Well, Tom, they're calling them detainments, if you will, not technically arrests. The people are being held on what you could call immigration charges here. It has been a fast and furious day here in Boston as investigators are learning that very likely there were many more people involved in this terrorist plot than anyone first imagined. First off today, we started to get information about pretty much what was a raid at the Copley Plaza Westin Hotel here in Boston. 3 people were detained after investigators found out that they were using a credit card that appeared to be the same credit card that some of the hijackers used to buy their tickets. After that, there was another police action at a suburban Boston hotel. They confiscated a car, and inside the car there were technical documents having to do with the Boeing 767, which of course is the kind of plane, the 2 planes that were hijacked out of here early yesterday morning. There was also that train that was stopped between Boston and Providence, and a man was taken off the train. He's being questioned. Police are telling us tonight that initially he's being held under suspicion of having a weapon. Here at the airport today, there were some 300 state troopers on duty here, keeping a watch on things. They're going through this airport with a fine-tooth comb. Every inch of it is being inspected with bomb-sniffing dogs. Every plane here is being inspected. And we can take a look here at some of what was going on earlier today here at the airport. As I said, a lot of activity, still not quite sure here in Boston when Logan Airport is going to reopen. It could still be days. Today they did start the removal of some 9,000 cars here at the airport that were abandoned when the airport was evacuated. A number of leads are being followed up on here, including that suspicious car that police were led to by a man who said he had an altercation with 2 Arabic men early yesterday morning. He told investigators where the car was parked. They went there and they found technical aviation manuals having to do with flying commercial planes written in Arabic. The police and investigators linked that car to 2 men, brothers, one of whom is an experienced pilot, and they believe those 2 were among the hijackers, Tom.
Dateline's Chris Hansen. Obviously, the Boston area is ripe with possible evidence that will be helpful to federal investigators. A number of people are being detained. Technically, they have not been arrested. They can be held on immigration charges or suspicion of immigration charges as they try to find out from them what connection they may have or what knowledge they may have. These hijackings from Logan Airport yesterday. Now let's go to NBC's Kerry Sanders, who's in Coral Springs, Florida tonight with more on the connection in that state with 2 of the pilots who apparently were trained and certified there. Kerry?
Well, Tom, we've moved down now to the FBI headquarters here in North Miami because a material witness has been flown into this area now and brought to the headquarters here. We don't have much more information on who was brought here or why. Meantime, the FBI task force that is set up here looked over the passenger manifest, and when they looked at it, some counter-terrorist agents saw a name there, and it jumped right off the page at him. Muhammad Atta him to a suspected car bombing or bus bombing in Israel in 1986. 33-year-old Muhammad Atta on the flight manifest of one of those who the FBI suspects took the controls of the hijacked jet. Where did he learn to fly? Venice, Florida. Visited today by FBI agents who carted away at least 8 boxes of records. NBC News has learned those records show Atta Marwan al-Shahi spent 7 months in training here. Employees say money never seemed to be an issue for them. The cost, $25,000 each to get a commercial flight rating. The plane Atta and his cousin flew to get their FAA certification, this Piper Seneca. The FAA's designated pilot examiner says he barely remembers either man from their 3 flight tests late last year. Dave Whitman says while neither could fully command a 757 or 767 with their flight experience, they could take control in the air and easily direct a jet like that into a target.
As far as just flying the airplane, such as driving it around the sky, it's not that much different.
Were Atta and his cousin legally in this country? That's something the FBI is now tracing. But flight school owner Rudy Deckers says he was suspicious.
We don't think that these people came in a normal way, not that we can know that. But the normal way is that they get a permit to enter. And a few of them are in reviews in the last couple of years, and that's okay by us. These people came at our door and wanted to get training done. And you know, what can you do? I mean, for us, it's a customer.
The FBI today visiting an apartment in Coral Springs, Florida, where Atta once lived.
Can you tell us if you found anything?
Oh, ma'am, no comments today.
At the same time, in Hamburg, Germany, another address used by Atta. Police there leaving with evidence. By all accounts, in Germany and in Florida, Atta and his cousin kept to themselves, except for last Thursday at this bar in Hollywood, Florida. It's believed both men came in, drank heavily, and then refused to pay the bill. FBI agents showing Atta's passport photo to bar staff and listening to the manager recount the argument.
If there's an issue where you can't pay your bill or something, just tell me, okay? Let's stop, you know, let's cut to the chase here. And the guy got like very, very offended, and he said to me, he said, "Oh, I can pay my bill. I'm an airline pilot." And I was like, "Okay." And that's what I told the FBI agents, and they were like, "Oh, really?" And
Now, FBI agents are serving search warrants in various locations around Florida. They served a search warrant a short time ago in Vero Beach, Florida. And now, about a half hour ago, agents, along with local police, moved in on an apartment complex in Hollywood, Florida, where they are also serving yet another search warrant. At this point, no idea what they're finding at these locations, but the agents are boxing up what they do find, and they're bringing it back here to their command center, which is under extreme heavy guard. Tom?
NBC's Kerry Sanders, thanks very much. His detective work has taken him back and forth across the state of Florida today, but now we're going to get a recap of the rest of the day's developments. Another unprecedented, indeed a surreal day for this country. NBC's David Bloom joins me again tonight. David?
Well, Tom, I am in Lower Manhattan. It is a very tense situation here tonight. Over the past hour or so, hundreds of relief workers have been streaming up this street, Church Street, moving away from the World Trade Center, which is about 6 blocks to the south. Why? Because at this hour, authorities fear that 2 buildings, including the large black building that you see there, the 50-story One Liberty Plaza, and another building directly in front of it, which you cannot see, the Millennium Plaza, could be in imminent danger of collapsing. Until the rescue workers were evacuated, this was the situation here in Lower Manhattan and throughout the nation tonight. As the day wears on, dump trucks and heavy equipment haul tons of debris from the toppled Twin Towers. Emotions grow taut. Exhausted New York City firefighters scouring the World Trade Center wreckage for victims, including hundreds of their colleagues missing, presumed dead.
We were there till 3 o'clock in the morning, but it's like Planet of the Apes. You got 200 guys dead. Whoever did it, they should kill the bastards that did it, period.
What does it do to you knowing that there are 200 of your brothers dead under there?
There's 200 guys. The guy that relieved me is dead. I can't do it.
Giuliani, conflicting earlier accounts, says only 4 people have been pulled from the rubble alive. 2 police officers, a firefighter, and then this afternoon,
a woman who was found still alive, taken to the hospital. So now there are at least 4 people that we've been able to take out. We're searching for others.
Addressing the nation for the 4th time in 2 days, the president says the attacks
were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
And tonight the country is on a war footing. Military troops patrolling the nation's capital.
That U-Haul over there.
National Guardsmen on the streets of New York. A Navy aircraft carrier, the USS George Washington, off Long Island. The stock market shut down until at least Friday. Airports still closed. Only a few planes, diverted after Tuesday's attacks, allowed to fly. In Manhattan, as the wind shifts, the cloud of smoke drifts north, the sawdust-like powder choking rescue workers and passers-by. And late today, what emergency workers fear most, the heap of rubble that remained from the World Trade Center's South Tower collapses. Authorities afraid that even as this rescue proceeds cautiously, still more lives could be lost. So again, that is why the rescue workers have been evacuated. Looking at a live picture again of the 50-story One Liberty Plaza. Authorities telling us that one of the buildings may be buckled, the other may have a crack in it. A very dangerous situation here tonight, and especially making the rescue efforts, which have been going on so cautiously, so laboriously, that much slower this evening. Tom.
Thanks very much, NBC's David Bloom. Over my shoulder, you can see the scene of Lower Manhattan looking across New York Harbor. Now we want to show you the reverse of all of this. This from Midtown New York, an eerie view of one of the world's most celebrated urban skylines, New York City. That is the Empire State Building in the foreground, and of course the dust and the debris and the smoke from Lower Manhattan continue to obscure our view. The twilight of another day in the city of New York, but of course it is not the twilight for the city and the people who are determined to make a comeback from this terrible devastation that has been visited upon them by terrorists. We struggle to come to grip with all of this. New proof tonight of the enormity of these attacks. A Columbia University seismograph, which usually monitors earthquakes, showed the shock waves created when the World Trade Towers collapsed. That's about 2.4 on the Richter scale. It's the size of a minor earthquake. And above ground, New York might never look the same. This is a graphic representation of New York's famous skyline before, now, after. We won't see it for real until the ban on helicopters is lifted. But up in space yesterday, crystal clear views of the huge plume of smoke and debris sent up into the sky by the attacks. So it was an attack that was in fact enormous in its magnitude, and the enormity is being felt tonight, the devastating effect on so many people. Back here in New York, the huge effort to find anyone still alive in the rubble continues nonstop. There are a few successes to report, but the outlook is very, very grim. NBC's Rahima Ellis joins us with the latest.
At Ground Zero today, firefighters on the front line still spraying the smoldering wreckage more than a day after the explosion. Working all through the night, hundreds of rescue teams picking through the rubble, but it's tough, slow work. There are literally mountains of debris here. The soot alone is 2 feet deep. The air is filled with choking dust. Power saws cutting through steel, blow torches slicing mangled girders. Though the chances of getting anyone out alive are now fading, there is still determination.
I've seen a couple of police officers, a couple of firefighters, a couple of civilians. There's a lot of people being pulled down.
Rescue teams from across New England and the mid-Atlantic states are working in 12-hour shifts. But most don't want to quit, even when their shift is done. They don't want to give up.
We work here, the other rescuers work there, and we all work as a team, so everybody's working as hard as we can. And yeah, these guys would work till they drop to get people out.
The emergency workers behind me are waiting their turn to go into the rubble. It is hard to imagine that what is on the other side of these workers is what is left of the World Trade Towers. You can see a portion of the archway that literally connected the two towers. It is crumbled now and on the ground. And just a few blocks, 2 to 3 blocks away, what was the top of this 110-story tower is now collapsed, and it looks like a structure that's arching out of the ground.
It's a mess. It's like your worst nightmare. You could never even believe what it's like in it.
Did you want to come?
Oh, of course, everybody does. We're going to need everybody because it's going to take a long time.
Even after more than a day at the heart of an unthinkable disaster, all the firefighters like Robert Fithian want to do is keep working to make certain no one is left behind. Rahima Ellis, NBC News in Lower Manhattan.
And if you would like to know how you may be able to help out, you can log on to msnbc.com, and on that online site you'll be able to find places where your assistance could be would be greatly appreciated. Now let's go to the medical battle to save the victims of the bombing. With that story, NBC's Robert Bazell joining us tonight from St. Vincent Hospital, the main medical staging area for the crisis. And Robert, we can only call it a bombing because, in fact, those two airlines were used as bombs, and they were heavily loaded with fuel. Are severe burns still the problem, or are we now into major trauma injuries?
Well, we've had both, of course, Tom, and the burns occurred earlier on in the day. This hospital, St. Vincent's, is the trauma center closest to the World Trade Center, and ambulances have still been coming in here at the rate of a few a day. And this trauma center can treat every type of injury except for severe burns, and those are taken uptown.
New York Presbyterian Hospital has the largest burn center in the country, filled today with 21 victims of the explosion, many unrecognizable with burns over 70 to 90% of their bodies.
The patients that we're seeing coming in, their burns are just horrible, and the majority of them cannot talk. And if we do get somebody who talks, we immediately get their name.
Nurses and doctors struggle to stabilize the patients.
Her pips were climbing today up into the near 50 range, 48, 50.
Dr. Roger Yurt, head of the unit, says the first 24 hours are the most crucial.
They actually lose so much fluid that they go into shock. And so we have to give large amounts of fluid, get them through that first 24 hours. And then after that, it's concerns for infection and getting their wounds to heal.
Brian Reeves, a security supervisor for a financial firm in the Trade Center, burned over 30% of his body. His wife, Jewel, and his 7-year-old son, Brighton, at his bedside today. He says thoughts of them helped him save himself.
Explosion came right through the window and broke the window, and it knocked me down. And I was in, but when I opened my eyes, I was right there in between the fire. I just saw my son's face and just got up, yelled, and ran.
Reeves is one of the lucky ones here. Many others not expected to live.
It's difficult. You have to remain detached to some extent, because if you did concentrate on some of the misery and the deformity that occurs, you wouldn't be able to do your job.
Still, the hospital president says his staff is eager.
We've got people volunteering for overnight shifts, volunteering everything from their bodies to help work, to giving blood, to being here at night, to giving their homes, their mattresses, their food.
A valiant effort to help the most critically injured.
As of this evening, Tom, this hospital and others in the area have treated about a total of 2,200 people. That's a lot of injured, of course, but it's a very small number compared to the expected number of dead. Tom?
All right, thanks very much, NBC's chief science correspondent, Robert Bazell, who is a journalistic authority on medical matters, of course. And we hate to keep coming back to this number, but there are estimates that as many as 10 to 15, perhaps as many as 20,000 people were in the World Trade Center at the time that the Twin Towers came down. Tonight there's a surprising piece of news out of the White House. Administration officials are claiming that Air Force One and the White House itself were in fact targets of the terrorist attacks, and that explains some of the president's diversionary action yesterday, flying from Florida to Louisiana and then on to Omaha. NBC's Campbell Brown is at her post in Washington tonight. Campbell, what's the latest there?
Well, Tom, the president has been facing criticism from both Democrats and Republicans for being away from Washington in the aftermath of the attacks. Well, tonight, the White House is on the defensive. Officials here claiming now that the president's life was in danger, but offering little information to back up that claim. Today, as the president gathers with his national security team to plan the U.S. response, administration officials make a startling announcement.
We have real incredible information that the airplane that landed at the Pentagon was originally intended to hit the White House.
According to military sources, the plane, which took off from Dulles Airport, first flew past the Pentagon, heading instead for the U.S. Capitol. The plane flew over the Capitol, then circled toward the White House. Officials say its intended target. What's unclear, why the plane kept going, crashing finally into the Pentagon. Officials also say Air Force One was a target. Information they learned as the president was en route from Florida to Louisiana's Barksdale Air Force Base. That's why they say the president was shuttled to yet another Air Force base in Nebraska, with fighter jets escorting the plane. But what exactly was the threat?
I'm not indicating what form it came in, John, and we'll know.
Today, as new information about the attacks pours in, the president signals the administration's first priority to make sure the rest of the world supports the U.S. in whatever action Bush decides to take.
This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world.
At the White House today, security eases somewhat. Tourists are allowed back in. The First Lady visits with victims of the Pentagon attack at a local hospital. In a show of unity, the president invites congressional leaders from both parties to the White House and asks for their support in funding relief efforts. The nasty budget fight for the moment forgotten as Democrats pledge their help.
It is our strong desire to do this not as Republicans or Democrats, but as Americans.
Now, regarding the White House claim that Air Force One was a target, officials here were asked the question today, do they believe that the plane that crashed in Pittsburgh may have been the plane targeting Air Force One? Officials would only say that they have no information about the mission of that fourth plane. Tom?
All right, NBC's Campbell Brown at the White House tonight. Now let's go to the Pentagon, still reeling from the attack that killed perhaps as many as 200 people yesterday. Military officials are working tonight on a plan to retaliate, and they're trying to reorganize themselves in the midst of all of their grieving as well. NBC's Jim McQuaid joins me once again from the Pentagon. Jim?
Tom, tonight, rescue workers here have given up all hope of finding anyone else alive as the Pentagon becomes one giant crime scene.
An army of FBI agents descends on ground zero, gathering up bits and pieces of possible evidence. But 24 hours after the attack here, nerves remain on razor's edge. The mere sight of a large plane in the distance sends people running for cover. The scene remains grim. There are no signs of life detected beneath the tons of rubble. The area remains too unstable for rescue workers to even get close, but there's little hope anyone is left alive. The Pentagon now estimates that between 150 to 200 people are killed, including those aboard the plane that slammed into the Pentagon. Tracy Rowenhorst's husband, Edward, worked for the Army and is among the missing.
Mostly I'm just here in case he comes out and that I can be somewhere in the vicinity where I can get to him.
Tonight, the U.S. military is on the move. Warplanes continue to patrol the skies over 41 major U.S. cities as the aircraft carrier George Washington arrives off the coast of New York to provide security and medical assistance. And in a videotaped message to the troops, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld pledges swift and sure retaliation.
We face powerful and terrible enemies, enemies we intend to vanquish, so that moments of horror, like yesterday, will be stopped.
Osama bin Laden remains the prime suspect. Pentagon officials tell NBC News if there's enough evidence to link him to the attacks, the Bush administration is prepared to move quickly and aggressively. The sources suggest these would not be the kind of pinprick missile strikes that have failed to get bin Laden in the past, but an all-out military campaign designed to capture or eliminate the Saudi-born terrorists. In addition, the military campaign could be aimed at the Afghanistan's ruling party, the Taliban, for harboring bin Laden. Such an effort would require a military commitment the Clinton White House would not make, and a willingness to accept a large number of American military casualties. After yesterday's devastating terrorist attacks, former General Norman Schwarzkopf says it's a sacrifice the American people are willing to make.
I think the American public is angry now, and I think they're going to get more angry rather than less angry. I think they're going to expect action to be taken.
That kind of support evident tonight as rescue workers unfurl a huge American flag on the roof of the Pentagon. Secretary Rumsfeld also warned his troops today against leaking any military secrets. One more sign the Pentagon is dead set on launching military strikes. Tom?
Jim McQuaid at the White House, thanks very much tonight. As we have mentioned, it could be days, even weeks, before there's a credible guess at how many people died in the World Trade Center attack. It could rival some of the deadliest days for Americans in all of history, all of which were in wartime. Gettysburg, Vicksburg, the Civil War, of course, Okinawa, Iwo Jima, Pearl Harbor during World War II. The magnitude of the losses here in New York, Washington, and in other cities where the passengers and crew of the doomed planes lived is just beginning to sink in. NBC Jim Avila tonight at Bellevue Hospital Center on Manhattan's East Side. Jim?
Tom, tonight, the reality of the situation, this very grim situation, being forced upon the families of the victims here in New York City as they go from hospital to hospital, sometimes with pictures and lists in their hands looking for their relatives, but they're being turned away, and often with no information, even when they're sent here to the city's morgue. A solemn parade of desperate New Yorkers, pictures over their hearts, tears in their eyes.
We love you, Nina. Please come back home.
Clutching the faces of the missing, holding hope in their hands.
We need to keep the streets clear, we need to keep everybody calm, and they're going to help you as quickly as possible.
At this one Manhattan hospital, St. Vincent's, police set up barricades to keep order among 500 relatives lining up for help. A photo gallery of the missing. Catherine Robinson, a 46-year-old trader on the 47th floor. Myra Rodriguez, 39 years old, a secretary on the 102nd floor. Pedro Graham, 35 years old, a broker on the 104th floor. Andrew Stern, 41-year-old broker on the 105th floor. Jack Aaron, a 52-year-old insurance man on the 95th floor. At the end of that long line, Craig Castro.
I have a picture here of Michelle Henry. This is the girl we're looking for.
Looking for his 27-year-old fiancée, last heard from at work on the 92nd floor of the World Trade Center when the planes hit.
I have the ring sitting in my room, and I was going to give it to her within the next month. And I just want to meet her and see her so I can give it to her, and then we can spend the rest of our life together.
Uptown at the New York City morgue, more heartbreak. The family of window washer Rocco Camage, last seen at work on the 105th floor. Today, they're looking for any sign of survival.
He called us about 5 to 10 minutes after the airplane actually hit from the 105th floor. So that was the last we heard from him, and he was just telling his wife and his kids to not worry, that he was in God's hands.
But for some, there is no hope left. New England farm country outside Boston, a memorial for pilot John Oganowski, American Airlines captain whose 767 was the first to crash into the New York skyline. Father of 3 daughters, remembered today as a family man who loved to fly.
I consider my brother a hero for many reasons.
Yardley, Pennsylvania, home of 15-year veteran United pilot Victor Saraceni, whose plane was the second to hit the Trade Center, mourned today by family and friends.
It's unspeakable. There are no words to describe it. I wish I could. I'm going to have to go home and sort the whole thing out.
And in suburban Chicago today, memorial services for Jeff Miladnik, a popular church pastor, father of 4 children, ages 4 to 21, aboard American Airlines Flight 11 when it was hijacked and crashed.
I mean, he's a tremendously brilliant, loving, passionate guy of 43 years.
On the United flight that crashed minutes later, Lisa Frost, newly graduated from Boston University and en route home to Southern California.
I'm sad that my daughter's gone. I will miss her tremendously. There's nothing that can ever take her place.
Part of the pain being felt across the nation tonight, also identified as one of the dead, Neil Levin, who is well known in the New York area as the executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. That's the bi-state authority that actually built and controls the World Trade Center, one of the now uncounted many who did not survive the accident. Tom?
Thanks very much. NBC's national correspondent Jim Avila tonight at Bellevue Hospital with the names and faces of just some of the victims. So many more are still to come. For more on the victims, including the list of names that have been released so far by authorities, you can log on to msnbc.com. Of course, if this is the work of foreign terrorists, as most authorities believe, it would not be the first foreign attack on American soil. Attacks on what has often been called Fortress America stretch back to the earliest days of the Republic, the war in 1812, to say nothing of the British. But not since Pearl Harbor has another nation attacked us outright. Only terrorists. And now to some of the most haunting questions of this crisis. We return to NBC's Terrorism Journalistic Task Force. And joining me first is NBC's Andrea Mitchell. Andrea, why has the United States apparently been unable to prevent such a massive attack? After all, there were so many warnings from so many authorities.
Exactly, Tom. With all the leads being developed now by investigators, the question tonight, why didn't we know earlier, in time to prevent the assault on America? How could the terrorists operate right under our noses? And why didn't billions of dollars spent on intelligence give us an early warning? As they hunt for the culprits, Bush administration officials are also asking tonight, Was this a colossal collapse of intelligence?
We did not get the cueing we needed. We did not get the intelligence information needed to predict that this was about to happen or be aware of this kind of event coming our way.
Tonight at headquarters of the top-secret National Security Agency, analysts review hundreds of millions of pieces of information intercepted before yesterday's attacks, searching for an overlooked warning, a pattern of activity.
It isn't just simply information that predicts operations. It's information that talks about meetings among suspicious people, traveling activities, movement of finance.
The problem, experts say, too much information, too little smart analysis.
We're getting to the point where our ability to collect information far exceeds our ability to analyze it. We need some help.
And terrorists speak in codes on the internet, use chat rooms, instant messaging, emails, and rarely, if ever, an explicit threat.
You just don't pick up a phone call saying we're going to blow up the World Trade Center tomorrow. That's not how it works in reality. It's far more complicated, and that's the difficulty.
It is not cheap. Before the attack, the counterterrorism budget request for next year, $13 billion, more than double what it was 6 years ago. And today, the president talks about spending billions more.
This morning, I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes.
And tonight at Langley, CIA Director George Tenet goes on closed-circuit television to rally thousands of demoralized troops, telling the nation's spies, quote, "Though we did not stop the latest terrible assaults, you, the men and women of CIA, have done much to combat terrorism in the past. Put some spirit in your steps, square your shoulders, focus your eyes. We have a job to do." And, say experts, that job is getting a lot more complicated and more dangerous.
There are groups out there that really are no longer just trying to get publicity and make a political point. They're trying to kill massive numbers of people.
While re-examining what went wrong, the more alarming possibility, Tom, is that our nation's spies will never be able to guarantee that it won't happen again. Tom?
NBC's Andrea Mitchell in Washington tonight. Now let's go to the question of learning to hate, the mind of a fanatic. Joining us from Tel Aviv tonight is NBC's Martin Fletcher with a look at the psychological makeup of those suicide terrorists. Martin?
Tom, it seems impossible to get into the mind of a suicide bomber. How could anyone do that? Well, Israel, at the sharp end of terrorism for so long, has some understanding of the terrorist's mind. How does someone get to this? Full of hate, ready to massacre so many and die in the process, turning your body into a guided missile. Allahu Akbar! Most experts agree suicide bombers are not lunatics. They're usually rational idealists who are prepared to die for what they believe is the greater good of their society. A typical candidate, a young man from a religious home, first approached in the mosque, then recruited, tested and trained to be a walking bomb.
They are acting, in their view, with the approval of God.
No country has more experience than Israel. Here, suicide bombers are a daily threat. At least 2 attacks a month for the last year. More than 60 Israelis killed, hundreds wounded. Terrorism experts say there are 2 types of motivation for the bomber. First, anger and a sense of hopelessness. Samir Toubazi, 19 years old, a Palestinian, caught by Israel with a 22-pound bomb, driving to a disco, ready to kill himself and as many Israelis as possible. I lost my job, my future, my hope, he says. Then Israeli soldiers killed my friend. I wanted to die. So Toubazi decided to become a suicide bomber. His goal, to kill Israelis, supported by many in the region, angry at Israel's treatment of the Palestinians.
War makes you hard-hearted. Death has become like a part of their daily life. They know that they're going to lose someone.
The second motivation for the bombers, a deep religious belief that a better life awaits in paradise. But Islam is divided on suicide bombers. The Quran, the Islamic holy book, forbids suicide, and many Muslims condemn the suicide bombers.
Islam has a philosophy that opposes attacks on civilians.
But others see them as martyrs, warriors committing not self-destruction, but heroic acts. Every death in battle with Israel fuels Arab anger, much of it directed against America, seen as Israel's chief ally, and in the minds of the bombers, both legitimate targets for terror. And events like today in the West Bank just keep the pot boiling. 9 Palestinians killed by Israeli soldiers who were trying to prevent more attacks by suicide bombers, but causing more anger in this cycle of Mideast violence that it appears has now come to the United States. Israel has found the only answer to suicide bombers is good intelligence to stop them before they begin their murderous journey. And now Israel's calling on Washington to pool all their resources in the fight against terror. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Martin Fletcher tonight in Tel Aviv. Now for a look at the latest intelligence on how the terrorists are operating, I'm joined by NBC's Fred Francis. Fred?
Tom, intelligence officials tell NBC News that this is the work, very likely, of terrorist cells. Cells, small groups of fanatics who very often don't know that others are on the same mission. The CIA estimates that Osama bin Laden has hundreds of these cells in 50 countries, including, one official said, many in this country.
One of their modus operandi is to move what we call sleepers or submarines into a community, and in some cases keep them there for years.
As many as 5,000 cell agents have been trained using this so-called encyclopedia of Afghan jihad, holy war, captured by U.S. personnel, detailing everything from communication security to bomb making. Then they often participate in local groups in the community and wait.
There was one case where they were prominent members of the local PTA. Another in the World Trade Center bombing was worked for a respected chemical company.
Techniques used by Ramzi Youssef, who ran several bin Laden cells in the 90s. He was caught and convicted in the first attack on the World Trade Center.
He failed in that attack because he couldn't get hold of enough explosives, and it appears that the bomb was placed by the wrong support column. But clearly where he failed, it's possible that other people inspired by him have succeeded now.
Analysts say the cell Youssef ran in this apartment in Manila 6 years ago was like the cells that pulled off yesterday's attack. His plan, called Operation Bojinka, 5 men independent of each other, planting bombs in 11 jumbo jets, timed to go off in 48 hours over the Pacific. Youssef's captured computer gave up exact tail numbers of the targeted planes. Also, an unbreakable code used to communicate, so no one person knows enough to compromise the operation.
And there's one person in the cell who's responsible for communicating with other cells or with the superstructure of the organization.
Also in that computer 6 years ago, a plan to crash into the CIA with a U.S. airliner loaded with explosives. Today, sources say, cells use anonymous emailing to message each other, often not knowing to whom they are communicating. All this confirmed by several bin Laden agents now in U.S. prisons. And intelligence officials say these people are highly motivated, highly disciplined, and obviously, as we've learned, willing to train a long time to die in a single act. Tom?
NBC's Fred Francis tonight. Thanks very much. Another member of our terrorist journalistic task force here at NBC News. Another casualty of this disaster, this country's aviation system. Another day of grounded planes. A whole new way of life for the flying public coming when the airlines actually do get back to business. Joining me now from Washington, NBC's aviation expert, Robert Hager. Robert?
Tom, air travel paralyzed for a second day in a row, and now it appears that may remain the same until Friday because of FBI and CIA concerns about starting back up too soon. Meantime, only a few flights are being permitted, and it looks as though that's the way it'll be tomorrow as well.
The delay will also give officials more time to prepare for a major crackdown on security. Sweeping searches of airports and empty planes using explosive-sniffing dogs. Clearing garages too close to terminal buildings where there'll be no parking from now on. Tougher searches of passengers and carry-on bags. No more curbside baggage check-in. Even plastic or metal knives banned from airport stores or concessions. And a temporary hold on carrying mail in passenger planes. The post office adding more trucks in the meantime. The Air Travelers Association's David Stempler.
The security lines at the security belts are going to be much, much longer, going to take much more time. There's going to be much more random checking for explosives, and so it's going to be a much longer process.
A few flights are allowed today to get some passengers from cities where they were diverted on to their original destinations. But thousands more remain stranded.
Does anybody want to be part of a carpool going to San Francisco?
Right now, it's up in the air what I'm going to do. Whether I'm going to try to stay here and get a flight tomorrow, or maybe take Greyhound. I'm not sure what my plans are right now.
Hundreds of Americans returning from abroad left in Canadian cities where they were diverted. In Nova Scotia, many housed overnight in a gymnasium. Meantime, do other security precautions need fixing? For instance, how could weapons like knives get through passenger screening? Intelligence consultant Bruce McIndoe.
It's really very difficult, and with modern technology of plastics and ceramics that can avoid metal detection, it's a very steep challenge to try to control those kinds of things getting on planes.
But it doesn't help that until today, some knives were allowed on planes. From now on, they'll all be banned. One warning from officials, the hush-hush program that puts armed sky marshals, shown here in a drill, puts them on a few international flights now as a deterrent to terrorism, will now be extended to a few domestic flights as well.
The Sky Marshals program is one that's been languishing because there hasn't been any U.S. hijacking in 10 years until this one. And even before then, most ended in very little loss of life, no loss of life. Now suddenly there have been 4 suicidal hijackings, taking an unprecedented toll in deaths and injuries. Tom?
NBC's Robert Hager tonight. Among the astonishing stories that we're all hearing as a result of this tragedy, the reports of so many of those doomed passengers on hijacked planes calling their loved ones on cell phones to tell them what was happening, then saying, "I love you and goodbye." More now on that from NBC's Bob Fall.
The use of cell phones is prohibited, the stewardess said. But here, those little boxes became a lifeline. Flight attendant C.C. Lyles on United Flight 93, hijacked from Newark, called her husband at home in Fort Myers, Florida.
The only thing I just want to say from that is my wife said she just called to tell me that she loved me dearly, and just to tell the boys that she loved us.
And just before that jetliner slammed into the Pennsylvania woods, business executive Thomas Burnett, father of 3, called his wife.
He called on the cell phone and told her that one of the passengers was already dead and that they knew that they were all going to die, and that 2 other men and he were going to try to do something.
Inclined to do something to fight back, 31-year-old Mark Bingham, a rugged ex-rugby player from Cal, who called home just before the crash.
He just said, "I want to let you all know that I love you very, very much in case I don't see you again."
We didn't have cell phones 20 years ago, so I reached out by praying.
Held hostage on a Pakistani airliner for 13 days 20 years ago, Jeffrey Belkin knows the captive passenger's terror.
At that point, it's just resignation to one's fate and saying my life's over. Possibly I did some good with my life.
Each call helps investigators, from Barbara Olson on the flight that slammed into the Pentagon. Information hijackers had box cutters. From Burnett, hints passengers fought back. In C.C. Lyle's call, passengers are heard screaming. Each call is a snapshot and a precious gift, says Mark Bingham's mother.
We're very comforted to be able to get the news from Mark himself. Somehow it made it much easier to take.
Brief messages that are indelible.
Through all what she was going through, she took the time to call me to let me know that she loved me and to let the kids know that she loved them. And I love her, and I just thank her for it.
At the end, a final link, words of fear and love, and then silence. Bob Fall, NBC News, Washington.
And unfortunately, it does appear tonight that there are so many more of those stories to come. Those stories, all these events, have riveted the country for a second day in a row, and they will in succeeding days. In places near to where the tragedies are playing out and far away, Americans are trying to figure out what to do in the face of hopeless grief and sympathy and anger. Here's NBC's Roger O'Neill. Roger?
Tom, religion often becomes the pillar we lean on during times like these. Here at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Denver, prayers for the families, prayers for peace, praying for answers to the question why, people turning to their God for help.
Church is a safe house, a place some see light shining on the darkness, a place where many find answers.
Hundreds at noon Mass today, but the strain of the last 2 days on the faces of the faithful.
It takes care of my soul.
Gives you a feeling of peace.
But at another house of worship in Irving, Texas, an Islamic mosque, the peace shattered when 6 bullets are shot through windows. In at least 5 other American cities, threatening emails, phone calls to Arabs and Muslims. Denver Bishop Jose Gomez admits when innocent people die, faith in God is tested.
It's difficult for us to understand why God allows these things to happen. But we cannot forget that pain and suffering is part of our human nature.
Across America today, emotions still running very high, anger just below the boiling point on talk radio in Los Angeles.
Since these people want to be martyrs and want to sit at the right hand of Allah, we should oblige them and send them there as soon as possible.
Another emotion, patriotism. Flag sales soared across the nation. The world's biggest retailer, Walmart, saying 88,000 American flags sold Tuesday, 100 times normal. Yet another emotion, empathy. Giving blood. So much blood has been donated, officials say they need no more for now. Still, at the Bonfils Blood Center in Denver, 550 units of blood already sent to New York. 2,000 people giving yesterday, 2,000 more today, 4-hour waits. Donors say it's the only way they can help.
It just makes you feel better that you're doing something.
There has also been a dark side to what some Americans have done. In Toledo, Ohio, and several other cities today, gasoline price gouging. $4 a gallon at one station, $4.99 here.
I don't know who bombed us, but the American people are having a ball with it, too. They're hurting their own people.
The action so outrageous, the government promising to prosecute those trying to rip off consumers. As fast as prices go up, they have since come down in most places. Perhaps only one other American city knows the pain and suffering of New York and Washington. That's Oklahoma City, where boxes of teddy bears were packed today. Doris Jones lost her daughter Carrie in the bombing of the Federal Building in 1995.
It just brings it all right back. You know, your heart just is aching so hard for those families because I've been there. I know what they're going through and what they're going to go through.
No one in America has escaped the terrorism. Professional baseball, the PGA, some college games, perhaps even the NFL, putting their games on hold. Sporting events just not appropriate this time. Tom?
NBC's Roger O'Neill in Denver, and in tomorrow morning's New York Times, there will be a full-page ad taken out by Oklahoma state officials expressing their sorrow and their support for the people of New York City. When the Oklahoma City bombing occurred at the Murrah Federal Building, among the first people to respond were the New York search and rescue teams who worked steadily and long hours searching for survivors there. Tonight, those same search and rescue teams are searching for their own and others in the rubble of the World Trade Center. Back here in New York, and some news about the financial markets, closed, of course, since the nerve center of banking and finance was essentially destroyed, and certainly it was wounded at the New York Stock Exchange, located just a few blocks from the World Trade Center. It will not reopen until Friday at the earliest, but bond trading will resume tomorrow morning. Joining me now for more on all of this from CNBC, the co-host of Business Center, Ron Insana. Ron, what are the analysts saying about the economic impact of this, especially about the possibility of a recession growing out of it?
Well, Tom, there is a great deal of worry and a great debate among economists now as to whether or not the uncertainty and fear surrounding this event will lead to a huge dent in consumer confidence, which was already fragile to begin with. There are worries that consumers will essentially freeze in place and cease buying cars and homes and other big-ticket items. The Fed has been able to avoid a full-blown recession thus far by lowering interest rates and keeping the consumer afloat. The risk is that that's not any longer true.
All right, CNBC's co-host Ron Insana. And Ron, we do expect the markets to reopen on Friday morning?
It is possible on Friday. Now, One Liberty Plaza, which is a very large building in just near the World Trade Centers, is at risk of collapse, as I'm sure you've reported. The problem there is that as there is more structural damage throughout the community, New York Stock Exchange Chairman Dick Grasso said they have to wait until the area is secure before they can reopen, Tom.
All right, CNBC's Business Center co-host Ron Insana. There have been so many examples of goodwill and good feeling in this country, and especially in the city of New York in the midst of this great tragedy. We want to share some of them with you tonight. Here is NBC's Ann Thompson. Ann?